You're about to fall asleep to something that might just rewire how you see the world. This isn't white noise or rain sounds. It's 3 hours of mind-bending intuition traps, the kind of simple puzzles and illusions that quietly expose the blind spots in your thinking. Your brain will start to notice the hidden flaws in everyday logic, not with stress, but with curiosity. Sleep deep. But before that, drop a quick comment and let us know where you're watching this from and what time it is for you. It's amazing how we're all connected, each of us chasing that perfect night's sleep. If this resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel Restwise, and join the journey. Monty Hall problem. Imagine this. You're on a game show. The lights are blinding, the crowd is cheering, and in front of you are 3 doors. Behind one of them, a brand new car. Behind the other 2, goats. Fluffy, adorable, utterly useless goats. The host, smiling way too hard, asks you to pick a door. You go with door number 1. Then he pauses. He doesn't open your door. Instead, he opens door number 3, and behind it, a goat. Now he turns to you, smirking just a little, and says, "Do you want to stay with your original choice, or switch?" Simple question, right? You've got 2 doors left. One with a car, one with a goat. 50-50. Right? Wrong. So wrong it hurts. Switching actually doubles your chances of winning the car.
Yeah.
Not increases. Not improves. Doubles. Staying gives you a 1 in 3 shot. Switching gives you 2 in 3. And here's the kicker. Most people, even smart people, argue with that. They refuse to believe it. They dig their heels in. They say it makes no sense. They think it's a trick. But it's not a trick. It's math. Cold, emotionless, unforgiving math. And yet, we feel like it's a trick. That's the trap. This is what's called the Monty Hall problem, named after the actual host of a real game show from the 1960s called Let's Make a Deal. And it messes with people's intuition so badly, it sparked decades of debate. Even professional mathematicians got it wrong at first. That's how deep the trap goes. Let me show you why it works the way it does. When you first choose a door, there's a 1 in 3 chance you pick the car. That means there's a 2 in 3 chance the car is not behind your door. Right? Now here's the trick. The host always opens a door that has a goat. He knows where the car is. He will never open the door with the car. So when he reveals a goat behind one of the 2 remaining doors, he's not just giving you random information. He's narrowing the field in a way that only works in your favor if you switch. That's where the switch becomes powerful. Think of it like this. If you initially picked the wrong door, which happens 2 out of 3 times, the host is basically pointing right at the car with his little goat reveal. He's telling you, without telling you, where the car actually is. But if you picked right at the start, switching will lose you the car. That's the 1 in 3 chance, so you either stick with a 1 in 3 shot or switch and get a 2 in 3. The math is clear, the logic is solid, and yet people resist. Hard. They say it feels unfair. They say it doesn't feel like switching should matter, because we confuse equal options with equal odds. We think symmetry means balance, but not everything that looks balanced is balanced. This is what intuition gets wrong. Your brain isn't wired for probability. It's wired for survival. And survival doesn't need precise math. It needs fast judgments, quick reactions, gut feelings. That's great for spotting a snake in tall grass. It's not so great for understanding game theory. The Monty Hall problem exposes that weakness like a spotlight. You can actually run this as an experiment with your friends. Use cards or paper or whatever you want. Let them pick. Let them stay. Do it 50 times. You'll watch the pattern emerge in real time. People who stay will win about 1/3 of the time. People who switch, 2/3. But even after seeing it play out, many still cling to the belief that switching doesn't matter. They'll say, well, that was just luck, or it depends on the situation, or my personal favorite. I just have a feeling. That's the trap. That's what this whole video is about. The mind is constantly lying to you, not because it's dumb, not because you're broken, but because we evolved to trust intuition more than abstraction. We want the world to make sense. And when the world doesn't feel fair or logical, we fight it. But here's the deeper truth most people miss. The Monty Hall problem isn't just about a game show. It's about how we make decisions when we don't have all the facts. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to justify a choice. It's about the illusion of control. Every time you choose not to switch, whether it's a door on a stage or a belief you've held for years, you're placing a bet, not just on the outcome, but on your intuition. And if you never question that, you'll keep making the same kind of mistake over and over in way bigger parts of life than just game shows. Like staying in the wrong relationship because you already invested so much time, or holding onto a job you hate because it feels safer than starting over, or doubling down on a bad idea because changing course would mean admitting you were wrong. These are all Monty Hall problems in disguise. The moment someone gives you new information, the odds change, but the mind resists. It wants to stick, to stay, to protect the ego. So here's the uncomfortable question you should ask yourself more often. What if switching is smarter, even when it feels wrong? And what if the only thing standing between you and a better outcome is your refusal to let go of the door you first chose? Let that one sit. Bat and ball problem. You ever get a question so simple, you answer it before you've even thought about it? Like it just feels obvious. Your brain skips straight to the finish line, hands you the answer like a gift, and you barely even look at it. You feel smart, confident, and then, 2 seconds later, someone tells you that answer is completely wrong. Not even close. And suddenly, your brain feels like a traitor. Here's the kind of question that does that to people. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 together. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. So how much does the ball cost? Go ahead. You probably already answered it. You didn't even have to try. Most people say the ball costs 10 cents. And that would make sense, right? 10-cent ball, $1 bat, that's 110. Don't. Except it's not. Because if the ball is 10 cents and the bat is $1 more, that makes the bat $1.10. Add that to the ball, and now you've got a total of $1.20. So now we're over budget. The real answer. The ball costs 5 cents. That makes the bat $1.05. Add them together and boom, you're back to 110. And just like that, a question that looked like a cupcake turned into a mousetrap. This is the bat and ball problem. It's been used in studies for years because it's such a clean, sneaky way to expose one of the biggest flaws in how we think. And it doesn't just trip up people who aren't paying attention. It gets everyone. Even students at elite universities fall for it. The question isn't hard. What's hard is overriding that first instinct. See, there's a part of your brain that's fast. It's automatic. It wants shortcuts. It makes snap judgments and keeps you moving. It's great for surviving in a dangerous world, but not so great for math. That's what psychologists call System 1 thinking. And System 1 is a smooth, talking little liar. It sounds so confident. It pushes answers into your mouth like they're facts, and you go with it because it feels right. It feels obvious. But feeling right and being right are not the same thing. Then there's another part of your brain. It's slower, quieter, and way more skeptical. It's the part that actually does the math, checks the logic, runs the numbers. That's System 2. It's the adult in the room. But here's the catch. It's lazy. It only shows up when it has to. And if System 1 says, "Hey, don't worry, I got this," System 2 usually just shrugs and goes back to sleep. So what happens? You read the question. System 1 jumps in and says 10 cents, no need to think. And unless you're in the habit of double checking your gut reactions, that's the answer that sticks. And now you're confidently wrong. That's not just a math mistake. That's a thinking mistake. And it's not limited to riddles on paper. This exact process plays out in real life. Every single day, you see a price tag and make a snap judgment about whether something's expensive. You hear a news story and instantly decide who's right and who's lying. You scroll past a comment online, and in half a second you know if that person's on your side or not. It's System 1 running the show, and when it runs unchallenged, you start building beliefs on top of guesses. That's how people stay wrong, not because they lack intelligence, but because they never slow down enough to realize they made a jump. This is why the bat and ball problem hits so hard. Because it's not just a trick question. It's a mirror. It reflects back the part of us that wants to be smart without doing the work, that wants to be right without checking. And if you don't learn to recognize that feeling, the rush of confidence that shows up too fast, you end up trusting it. You start defending it. You double down on bad ideas just because they felt good when you first had them. The crazy part, once someone shows you the actual math, you don't just accept it. You feel annoyed, like somehow the question was unfair, like you were set up. And that right there, that reaction, is more revealing than the mistake itself. It shows how attached we are to our first impressions. Even when they're dead wrong, we cling to them. We wrap our identity around being right. That's the deeper trap. So next time something feels obvious, a fact, a decision, a judgment, ask yourself, is this actually right? Or is this just easy? Am I thinking this through? Or am I just letting System 1 run wild while System 2 sleeps in the back? Because if a 5-cent ball can fool your brain in 5 seconds, what else is slipping past your radar? Checker shadow illusion. There's this moment that hits you like a punch to the brain. You're looking at something completely normal, something boring even, and then it shifts. You realize you've been seeing it wrong the whole time. Not just a little off. I mean completely backward. That's the kind of glitch we're talking about here. And it doesn't happen because you're not paying attention. It happens because your brain is working exactly the way it's supposed to. And that should scare you. It starts with this checkerboard, black and white tiles, classic pattern. Sitting on top of it is a green cylinder, just casting a soft shadow across a few squares. You look at 2 of the tiles, one outside the shadow and one inside. One's clearly dark gray. The other is clearly light gray. You'd bet your life on it. There's no way they're the same. Except they are. They're literally the exact same shade. Your eyes are lying. Your brain is filling in false information, and you can't stop it. This is called the checker-shadow illusion, and it might be one of the clearest examples of how messed up your intuition can get. Because even when someone shows you proof, even when the color is dragged out and placed side by side, your mind refuses to believe it. The shadow makes the lighter square look darker, so your brain corrects it. It says no, that must be a light square under a shadow. And then it lies to you, not maliciously, just automatically. This illusion is doing something most people never think about. It's showing you that your brain doesn't report what's real. It reports what it thinks should be real. That's the difference. What you see is not raw data. It's been preprocessed, color-corrected, smoothed out, altered based on context and expectations. Your eyes aren't cameras. They're filters. And the scariest part is that they're doing all of this without asking your permission. Your brain sees a shadow and makes assumptions. That's what it's designed to do. You've evolved to survive, not to be accurate. That's why this illusion exists. Your brain knows shadows make things look darker, so it compensates. And normally that's helpful. It helps you navigate the world without getting confused by every little change in lighting. But in this case, it betrays you. It tells you two identical things are completely different. And no matter how much evidence you get, no matter how many times someone proves it, your gut doesn't budge. That's the trap. Now step back from the checkerboard, because this same process happens everywhere in your life. It's not just about color. It's about people, about judgment, about memories. Someone says something and your brain adds meaning. Someone makes a face and your brain adds emotion. You remember something from 10 years ago, and your brain adds little edits, tweaks the mood, changes the lighting. Suddenly, you're not seeing the past. You're seeing the version your brain decided to keep. And we trust it. That's the wild part. We trust our first impressions, our memories, our instincts, like they're sacred. We argue based on what we think we saw or what we think someone meant, and we have no idea that what we're using to defend ourselves is a filtered version of the truth. That's what the checker shadow shows you. Not just that you can be wrong, but that your brain will fight to keep you wrong, because it wants consistency more than accuracy. You might think illusions are rare, these little glitches that only show up in optical puzzles. But they're happening constantly. In relationships, in conversations, in decisions. You interpret tone, you guess intentions, you label people, and all of that is happening through this same process. Subconscious assumptions layered on top of raw experience. And you don't question it. You just roll with it, because it feels so damn real. And that's the worst part. It feels real. That square looks lighter. That memory feels true. That judgment seems obvious. But you're not seeing the square. You're seeing the story your brain told itself about the square. You're not reacting to what happened. You're reacting to what you think happened. The illusion never disappears. That's what makes it honest. Even after you know the squares are the same, you'll still see them as different. Your brain doesn't stop correcting. That's the point. Knowing the truth doesn't suddenly give you clarity. It gives you discomfort. You start realizing how often your perception is just a best guess. How often your brain is more interested in being fast and familiar than being right. So ask yourself, if something this simple can fool you this hard, what else is slipping through? What else are you totally convinced about just because it feels true? When someone disagrees with you, are they really wrong, Or are they just seeing a different part of the checkerboard? Maybe your square looks lighter because you're standing in a shadow. Maybe theirs looks darker because they're in the light. But what if it's the same square? That's not a riddle. That's your life. And it's happening every time you trust your instincts without stopping to challenge them. So next time you're sure about something, not kind of sure, I mean absolutely sure, maybe just pause, just for a second. Ask yourself, what am I actually seeing? What story is my brain building around this moment? Because sometimes the thing you're staring at isn't the problem. The real problem is the shadow you never noticed. Birthday paradox. So let me ask you something simple. How many people do you think you need in a room before there's a good chance that at least two of them share the same birthday? Like, really think about it. Not some trick question. Just straight odds. 1 in 365, right? Seems rare. Your gut probably says, what, maybe 70 or 80 people? Maybe a full classroom? Nope. You only need 23. Yeah. 23 people in one room, and there's over a 50% chance that two of them have the same birthday. Not a guarantee. Just a coin flip chance. And if you raise that number to 40, the odds shoot up to almost 90%. By the time you get to 70 people, the odds are basically certain. And yet, almost no one guesses that, because it feels wrong. It feels like the chances should be way lower. Like this is some mathematical voodoo, some weird corner case trick. But it's not. It's called the birthday paradox. And it's one of the clearest examples of how badly your intuition breaks down when it tries to deal with probability. Because here's the thing. You're not calculating how likely someone shares your birthday. That would be rare. You're calculating how likely any two people in the room match each other's. And that changes everything. Once you have 23 people, there are 253 possible pairs. That's 253 chances for a match. Not just 23, and your brain never accounts for that. It skips right over it, because you're not wired for that kind of math. We evolved to think in single events, one predator, one meal, one storm. We didn't evolve to think about networks of overlapping chances. So when we hear 23 out of 365, it feels tiny. But when you realize it's really 253 events being compared, it's not tiny at all. It's crowded. And in crowded systems, weird things start to happen. It's the same kind of mental glitch that makes people buy lottery tickets thinking they've got a shot, or refuse to fly but drive without a second thought, or get freaked out when 3 bad things happen in 1 week and call it a pattern. We're constantly looking for meaning, constantly guessing at odds, and constantly getting them wrong. And the birthday paradox is such a clean way to show it. Because it takes something harmless, birthdays, and reveals how warped our gut instincts can be. It's not even about math. It's about how confident we feel when we're wrong. That's the trap. Not just being off, but sure that we're right. You ask someone the question. They think for 2 seconds. They shrug. They give their guess. And they'll say it like it's obvious. Like it's simple arithmetic. But it's not. It's hidden complexity wrapped in a familiar package. That's what makes it so good, the illusion of understanding. That's the real magic trick. And honestly, this same pattern plays out in way bigger areas of life. Like risk. How we calculate danger. People are terrified of the rare, dramatic stuff. Plane crashes, shark attacks, nuclear meltdowns. but they barely flinch at the slow, statistical killers, heart disease, distracted driving, dehydration. Why? Because your brain isn't reacting to numbers. It's reacting to stories, to what feels real. And your brain is terrible at comparing invisible risks. The same logic gap shows up with coincidences too. You think of someone and they call you, and your brain flips out. What are the chances? That must mean something. But if you look at how many thoughts you have, how many people you know, how often your phone rings, of course those moments are going to overlap sometimes. It's not magic. It's math. But it feels like magic. And that feeling wins. The birthday paradox isn't just a party trick. It's a warning. It shows you that your intuition can be wildly, confidently off the mark, not just wrong by a little, wrong by a lot, and still feel dead on right. And here's the dangerous part. In real life, you don't get corrected. You don't get to see the actual odds. You don't have someone pause the world and explain the truth. You just keep stacking beliefs on top of gut feelings, building a worldview that's full of little statistical hallucinations. And if you never stop to check, you never know. So, yeah, it takes 23 people for a 50-50 birthday match. And no matter how many times you hear that, it'll still feel wrong. That's what makes it powerful. That feeling is your signal. The discomfort, the disbelief, that's the moment your brain is telling you, hey, I don't actually know how this works. And that's the moment to lean in. Because when your gut says impossible, that might just mean you're standing at the edge of understanding something way bigger than it looks. Gambler's fallacy. You're watching someone lose money, and you already know what they're thinking. They're muttering to themselves, bouncing their knee, watching that roulette wheel spin like it's personal. Red, again. Red, red, again. And then they slam a chip down on black, not because they calculated the odds, but because they felt them. They felt like black was overdue, like the universe has some sort of moral obligation to make things even. But it doesn't, and it never did. That feeling right there, that's the gambler's fallacy. It's not just a mistake. It's a deeply human glitch in the way we think about chance. Because we're not wired to understand randomness. We're wired to crave patterns. When we see a string of similar outcomes, our brains don't say, wow, randomness is wild. They say this has gone on long enough. We start thinking something has to change. We call it a streak, a run, a cold hand. We believe in being due, like luck is a rubber band that always snaps back. But here's the truth that no one wants to accept. The universe doesn't keep score. The roulette wheel doesn't remember. If it's a fair game, every spin is a brand new event. Doesn't matter if it landed red 10 times in a row. The next spin is still the same odds. That's why it's so dangerous. The gambler's fallacy gives you false confidence. It makes you believe that your chances are improving when they're not. And when you believe that, you start chasing. You bet bigger, go deeper, and when it doesn't work, you double down. Because now it's not just about winning. It's about proving the world is fair. That's when it gets emotional, and that's when people lose everything. It feels logical at first. It feels like you're playing smart. But you're not seeing the math. You're seeing a story. Your brain loves stories. It wants to make sense of chaos. It wants to believe that if things have been bad, good must be coming. That if you failed 5 times in a row, then the 6th must be your moment. But chance doesn't work like that. It doesn't have memory. It doesn't balance out. Unless the system itself changes. unless the odds shift. Every new try is the same as the last, but that's hard to accept because it means we don't get rewarded for trying. It means the world doesn't owe us a win. And for most people, that's terrifying. We want the universe to feel fair. We want the effort to mean something. And so we buy into the fallacy because it offers comfort. It tells us there's order in the randomness, and casinos know that. They don't need to lie. They don't need to rig the game. They just let your own psychology destroy you. They create the illusion of streaks. They light up the board with the last 10 numbers. They feed the part of your brain that thinks it's spotting a trend. And once you believe you're onto something, you stop thinking logically. You start playing emotionally. That's the trap. The same thing happens outside of gambling. You go on 5 bad dates and think the next one has to be better. You send 10 job applications and believe the 11th will be the one. Not because anything's changed, but because it feels like change is due. But the truth is, each new attempt is its own flip of the coin. You're not owed balance. Life doesn't work like a scoreboard. It works like a dice roll, cold, indifferent, and sometimes unfair. That sounds bleak, but there's freedom in it. Once you stop expecting the universe to fix your losing streak, you can start focusing on what actually increases your odds. Not luck, not superstition. Strategy, persistence, skill, real leverage. That's how people win. Not by waiting for the math to owe them, but by learning to play better. By knowing when to walk away and when to stop chasing ghosts. Because that's what the gambler's fallacy does to you. It turns randomness into a ghost story, one where luck has moods and fate takes notes. But it's just noise. And when you realize that, you stop chasing streaks and start paying attention to systems. You stop being a victim of the wheel and start asking better questions. Like, what part of this can I actually control? What decision is smart regardless of what happened last time? That shift, that's where real power starts. So next time you feel like you're due for a win, pause. Don't ask what's fair. Ask what's real. Because the world doesn't owe you a black after 10 reds. But you do owe yourself the truth. Anchoring effect. Imagine you walk into a store and see a watch with a price tag that says $1,200. You scoff. That's insane. Then the salesman walks over and says, "Hey, just for today, it's on sale for $400. Suddenly, you're interested. Now it feels like a deal. It feels like you're saving $800. It feels like you're winning. But you're not, because that price was never real. It was an anchor. That original number, 1,200, it was planted in your mind to shape your expectations. You weren't just reacting to the $400 price. You were reacting to the difference between 1,200 and 4. And that shift, that mental comparison, that's where the trap lies. Anchoring is one of the most powerful cognitive biases we fall into, and we fall into it constantly. It's not just in stores or sales. It's in negotiations, decisions, even relationships. The first number, the first impression, the first idea. It creates a mental reference point. And everything after that gets measured against it, whether it makes sense or not. The shocking part is how deeply irrational this is. In study after study, people's judgments are wildly distorted by completely unrelated numbers. You can show someone a random number on a wheel, literally rigged nonsense. And if that number is high, they will guess higher on an unrelated question. Ask them to guess the population of a country right after spinning a wheel that lands on 85. and their answer will be way higher than someone who spun 15. That's not logic. That's mental gravity. Your brain grabs the first number it sees and lets it pull everything else closer to it. Even when you know it shouldn't matter, it still does. And it happens fast. Instantly. Silently. Your brain doesn't say, "Hey, I'm anchoring now." It just folds that number into the background, and suddenly, you're not making an objective decision anymore. You're negotiating with the anchor in your head. And you don't even realize it. Think about how this plays out in real life. You go to buy a car, and the dealer says the price is $38,000. You try to bargain down to 34, thinking you're being tough. But if he had started at 28, you'd be shooting for 24. Nothing changed but the first number, and yet everything changed. You go for a job interview, and they ask your current salary. That number becomes the baseline, even if it has nothing to do with what the role should pay. If you say 50,000, you might get offered 55. But if you had said 60, you might have gotten 65. That's how fast anchoring rewrites the frame. It even shows up in self-worth. If someone tells you they usually date people who are super successful, you immediately start measuring yourself by that standard. If a teacher says this class is known for low grades, you'll probably lower your expectations without meaning to. It's not just about numbers. It's about first impressions, first statements, first assumptions. They become mental landmarks, and you navigate around them whether they're accurate or not. And here's the scary part. Even when you know you're being anchored, it still works. Even if I tell you right now, "Hey, don't let this number affect you," it still will. That's how deep this runs. Your brain latches on, and it won't let go. Because the mind doesn't like operating in a vacuum. It needs context. It needs contrast. And when the only thing it has is a single number or a single statement, that becomes the ruler it measures everything else by. And most of the time, you don't even notice it. You think you're being objective. You think your choices are your own. But behind the scenes, your frame of reference has already been hijacked. You're not comparing options anymore. You're comparing distances from the anchor. So how do you fight it? The answer isn't to ignore anchors. That doesn't work. You can't hear a number. But you can create your own. You can walk into a negotiation with your number first. You can set the reference point on your terms. You can say, "This is what I'm worth. This is what I expect. This is my standard," before anyone else anchors you into theirs. Because if you don't set the anchor, someone else will. And once it's set, everything gets warped around it. You start to realize how many decisions in your life weren't really choices. They were reactions to anchors you didn't even see. Prices, salaries, expectations, values, all of them shaped by what came first, and not always by truth. Sometimes by manipulation, sometimes by randomness. And when you see it for what it is, not insight, not instinct, but a trick, you stop falling for it. You stop reacting to the first number like it has authority. You pause. You recenter. You question the frame. And that pause, that's where real judgment begins. Base rate neglect. Let's say I tell you about a guy named David. He's quiet, loves math, wears glasses, and spends a lot of time alone. Now I ask you, is David more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? Almost everyone says librarian. It feels right. He fits the stereotype. But here's what your brain skipped over without even realizing it. There are way more farmers than librarians. Like, not a little more. Depending on the country, the ratio can be 50-1. So even if only a small percent of farmers are quiet or nerdy, the math still says David is probably a farmer. But your brain didn't care about that. It heard a story, it liked the story, and it ignored the statistics. That right there, that's base rate neglect. It's not stupidity. It's instinct. When we hear details, we forget about context. We forget about the big picture. We forget about the actual odds. Base rates are just the raw facts about how common something is, like how often a disease shows up in the population, or how many people in a group match a certain description. They're boring. They don't grab our attention, but they matter, and we ignore them all the time. Here's how dangerous that can get. Let's say there's a test for a rare disease. The test is 99% accurate. You take it. It comes back positive. Most people panic. They think they almost definitely have the disease. But let's slow down. The base rate, the actual chance you had the disease to begin with, was maybe 1 in 1,000. So now, even with a super accurate test, the odds that this is a false positive are still really high. You might not have it at all. But your brain doesn't do that math. It latches onto the test result and ignores the base rate completely. That's not just a mental mistake. That's a life-altering error in judgment. It shows up in hiring, in dating, in investing. You meet someone who's super charismatic and assume they're probably a great leader. You see a flashy startup and think it's the next unicorn. You forget to ask, how often does someone like this actually succeed? What's the base rate for someone in this position? Because that number doesn't lie. The story might be convincing, but the numbers are what tell you how likely the story is to be true. And here's the wild part. We do this more when the story feels vivid. If I say someone drives a hybrid, does yoga, and reads food labels, you'll probably guess they're from California. But California is just a small part of the country. Statistically, they're more likely from somewhere else. But you never even ask that, because the stereotype hijacks your logic. Base rate neglect is basically your brain saying, this person seems like the type, so they probably are. It replaces statistics with vibes. But the world doesn't run on vibes. It runs on probabilities. And when you ignore that, you make decisions based on illusion instead of reality. Here's what makes it tricky. Your brain isn't doing this maliciously. It's trying to be efficient. It's shortcutting. It says, I don't need to do the math. I've seen this before. I've got a feeling. That works okay in daily life. But in high-stakes situations, hiring, diagnosing, investing, trusting someone, you better check the base rates. Or you're just guessing. Think about how often we see this in the news. A shocking headline appears. A rare event that's horrible and dramatic. Suddenly people think it's common. They think it's everywhere. They get scared. But what they're missing is how rare it really is. The base rate doesn't care how emotional the story is. The base rate just says, this is how often it happens. And most of the time. The answer is almost never. We're bad at thinking like statisticians. We want to be gripped by stories. We want clear villains and perfect heroes. But life isn't built that way. It's built on messy numbers and overlapping probabilities. And if we want to make smarter decisions, we have to stop trusting the first explanation that feels right and start asking what's actually likely. Base rate neglect is one of those mental traps that feels invisible, because it hides inside good stories. But once you know it's there, you start catching yourself. You start asking better questions. You start saying, wait, how common is this really? What are the actual chances? And that shift, that habit of checking the base rate, that's how you stop being fooled by the surface and start seeing what's underneath. Because good decisions don't come from the most convincing story. They come from the clearest lens. Hot hand fallacy. You ever watch a basketball game where one player just can't miss? Every shot, bang. Crowds going wild. Announcers saying he's got the hot hand. He's on fire. The defense starts panicking, doubling him, shifting the whole strategy. And you believe it too. Because it looks real. It feels real. But what if I told you? The hot hand might not be real at all. That's not just me being contrarian. This was actually studied, and the results shook people. Researchers looked at thousands of basketball shots. They wanted to know if players were really more likely to make a shot after making their last one. And what they found? Most of the time, no. The odds didn't go up. In fact, sometimes they dipped. The hot hand was mostly an illusion. Now I know what you're thinking. Come on, I've seen it. I've felt it. Sometimes players get in the zone they just can't miss. And yeah, confidence, rhythm, momentum, those things exist. But the truth is, we're really bad at reading randomness. We think streaks mean something more than they do. We expect patterns even when none exist. This is the hot hand fallacy. It's the belief that because someone has been successful a few times in a row, they're more likely to keep being successful. Not because anything changed, but just because they're on a roll. It shows up everywhere, not just sports. A stock goes up 5 days in a row, and people start calling it a rocket. A salesperson closes 3 big deals in a week, and suddenly they're untouchable. A student gets 3 A's in a row and thinks they've cracked the code. The people around them start treating them differently. They get praised, trusted, hyped. But no one's asking the real question. Is this a streak? Or is it just variance? Because the danger of the hot hand fallacy isn't just blind optimism. It's misattribution. You start assuming that success is self-sustaining. That momentum is a force of nature. You stop analyzing and start worshiping. You make bets you wouldn't normally make. You give someone the ball again and again. Not because it's the best move, but because they were hot earlier, and that creates risk. See, when we believe someone is on fire, we lower our guard. We stop making calculated decisions and start feeding the streak. And that's fine. Until it isn't, because all it takes is one bad shot, one bad deal, one wrong move, and suddenly the streak ends. And you realize it was never a pattern. It was just a coin landing heads 3 times in a row. The tricky thing is, the fallacy feels right. When you're winning, you feel different. You feel confident, sharper, almost invincible. But feeling hot and being hot aren't the same thing. Sometimes, what we think is momentum is just randomness dressed in confidence. And that confidence, it's contagious. Everyone around you starts reacting to your streak. Teammates defer. Managers give you more freedom. Investors pile in. And soon, you're not just living the streak. You're trapped by it. You start thinking you have to keep it going. That failing would break the illusion. And so the pressure builds, the ego swells, and the crash becomes inevitable. This happens in casinos too. Someone hits 3 wins in a row, and everyone's watching. They start making bigger bets. They believe the table is hot, but nothing has changed. The odds are the same. The dealer didn't get enchanted. The dice don't care. But try telling that to someone with adrenaline in their veins and chips in their hand. What we're really seeing here is pattern hunger. Our brains are wired to find meaning in sequences. We see faces in clouds, messages in noise, signs in streaks. The hot hand fallacy is just one more example of our craving for cause in chaos. We don't want to believe the world runs on randomness. We want to believe it runs on rhythm. And that's why this trap is so dangerous. Because it makes us feel like we're in control when we're not. It tells us success builds on itself automatically. But real success isn't about riding streaks. It's about understanding systems, knowing the odds, staying level whether you're winning or losing. So next time someone's on a roll, stop and ask, is this skill? Is this strategy? Or are we just watching a coin land heads again and again? Because even coins can look magical if you don't know the math. Conjunction fallacy, aka a Linda problem. Picture this. You're told about a woman named Linda. She's 31, single, outspoken, very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice. She also participated in anti-nuclear protests. Now, I ask you, which is more likely? 1. Linda is a bank teller. Or 2. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Most people go with option 2. It feels more accurate. It fits her vibe. She sounds like someone who would be passionate about activism. The description leads you straight to that answer. But here's the twist, and it's a brutal one. Mathematically, option 2 can never be more likely than option 1, ever. Because option 2 is a subset of option 1. The chance of Linda being both a bank teller and a feminist is always going to be less than or equal to the chance of her being a bank teller, period. That's basic probability. But your brain doesn't care about that. It cares about coherence. It cares about the story. And that's the conjunction fallacy. It happens when we assume that specific conditions are more probable than a single, broader one. We treat a more detailed option as more likely, just because it matches our expectations better, even though the added detail only reduces the probability. Think about how wild that is. You're literally adding more requirements, which shrinks the pool of possibilities. And yet, it feels more true. That's not logic. That's narrative. That's our brain saying, this story feels right, so I'm going with it. And we do this constantly. In courtrooms, in conversations, in job interviews. We believe that more detail makes something more true. You hear someone say, she's a teacher who also writes poetry and volunteers on weekends. And it sounds more likely than just saying, she's a teacher. But that extra detail doesn't increase the odds, it lowers them. You're adding layers that have to be true at the same time. The conjunction fallacy doesn't just make us wrong, it makes us confidently wrong. Because the story feels stronger, more compelling. It lights up the parts of your brain that crave narrative over numbers. And once that happens, the math gets ignored completely. This isn't just a cute riddle or a trick question. This fallacy leaks into real, world decision-making. When investors read market reports, they're more likely to believe a prediction if it's wrapped in a story. They'll buy into something like oil prices will rise and lead to political unrest in South America, instead of just oil prices will rise. The more specific scenario feels more insightful. But every added detail makes it less statistically likely. And here's the deeper issue. We are wired to favor things that match our mental models. When a description of a person or a situation fits a familiar pattern, we overestimate how likely it is. That's because our brains evolved to make quick judgments based on pattern recognition. In the wild, that helped us survive. Today, it helps us build illusions. The Linda problem exposes a crack in our reasoning, a place where our intuition pulls us away from the truth. Because in the real world, probability isn't always visible. It's not flashy. It's not colorful. It doesn't feel like a well-written character bio, but it's still the truth. And when we ignore it, we pay the price. Think about how this applies to people. You hear someone talk about spirituality, eating clean, and practicing yoga, and you instantly assume they probably avoid vaccines. That combo just feels like it goes together. It matches the vibe. But that's a stereotype trap. It's the same fallacy. You're linking ideas that seem connected, instead of asking what the base rates actually are. The conjunction fallacy makes us buy into stereotypes harder. It makes us more sure of things we should actually be questioning. And worst of all, it feels like good reasoning when it's anything but. That's what makes it so dangerous, because it's not about being smart. Smart people fall for it too. In fact, some of the first studies on this showed that even PhDs and grad students in statistics departments chose the wrong answer, just because it felt right. And if experts are falling for it, what do you think happens to the rest of us? We build entire beliefs, predictions, and expectations on combinations that sound believable, but are mathematically broken. We think we're being rational. We think we're connecting dots, but we're just weaving stories and pretending they're truth. Once you see the trap, though, you start catching it. You stop assuming more detail means more accuracy. You pause and ask, am I believing this because it sounds good or because it is good logic? Because real clarity doesn't always come in stories. Sometimes it comes in stripping them away. Survivorship bias. During World War II, the military wanted to know how to reinforce their planes. They analyzed the bullet holes on returning aircraft and saw most of the damage was on the wings and tail. So naturally, they thought, reinforce those areas. Sounds smart, right? But then a statistician named Abraham Wald came along and flipped the entire logic. He said, you're only looking at the planes that made it back. What about the ones that didn't? That moment changed everything. Because the bullet holes weren't showing where planes were most vulnerable. They were showing where planes could take damage and still survive. The ones that didn't return probably got hit in other areas, like the engines or the cockpit. So that's where the reinforcement needed to go. This is survivorship bias. It's what happens when we focus only on the winners, the survivors, the success stories, and forget about all the ones who failed and disappeared quietly. It's invisible, and that's what makes it dangerous. You see it every time someone tells you how to be successful by following the habits of billionaires. Wake up at 5 a.m., meditate, cold shower, hustle. These are the routines of people who made it. But no one ever studies the thousands of people who did the exact same things, though, and failed anyway. Because they're not in the spotlight, they didn't survive. So their stories get ignored. That's how we end up chasing ghosts. We copy what we can see, not realizing that what we can't see is usually more important. The silent failures, the unnoticed collapses, the people who did everything right and still lost. Survivorship bias erases them. It blinds us with a highlight reel. You want to start a company. Everyone points to Apple, Amazon, Tesla. You're shown the legends, the outliers, the one in a million. And it makes you think success is more common than it really is. You think, If I just do what they did, I'll win too. But what you're missing is the mountain of broken startups no one talks about. The people who worked just as hard, who pitched just as well, who hustled even harder, and still failed, not because they were dumb, not because they were lazy, just because the odds weren't in their favor. And that's the key. Survivorship bias gives us a distorted view of probability. It makes us think we're playing a game with better odds than we really are. It happens in fitness too. You see the ripped influencer. You hear how they cut carbs, did intermittent fasting, trained twice a day. You think, wow, that must be the formula. But you never see the 10,000 people who followed that exact plan and gave up, or got injured or saw no change. The visible survivors are loud. The invisible failures are silent. This fallacy isn't just a mental hiccup. It shapes entire industries. Bookshelves are filled with autobiographies of successful CEOs, athletes, artists. But no one publishes the autobiography of the guy who tried for years and never made it. No one tells the story of the near miss, the breakdown, the burnout. So you end up with a warped sense of how things work. You think the survivors are the norm, when really they're the exception. And it doesn't just affect dreams. It affects data. If you study only the companies that lasted, you'll miss the factors that killed the others. If you only look at patients who survived a treatment, you might ignore the ones who died during it. If you only analyze marriages that lasted, you'll miss the lessons from the ones that didn't. In every area of life, the same trap waits, confusing visibility with truth. And once you start to see it, it's everywhere. Survivorship bias makes us overestimate success rates, underestimate risk, and romanticize struggle. It tells us that persistence always pays off. That failure is just a stepping stone. But sometimes failure is just failure, and ignoring that truth leads to false hope. But here's the twist. This doesn't mean you shouldn't aim high. It doesn't mean you should quit. It means you need to see the full picture, know the odds, understand the cost, and realize that copying the survivors isn't a guarantee. It's a gamble. Because the graveyard of failure is full of people who look just like the winners, right up until they lost. So when someone tells you how they made it, ask yourself, who didn't? What am I not seeing? What's the dark space behind the spotlight? That's where the truth lies. And if you want to make real decisions, not just emotional ones, you have to look into that space, even when it's uncomfortable. Because sometimes success doesn't teach you as much as silence. Müller-Lyer illusion. You're looking at two lines, same length. One has little arrow tails pointing out. The other has arrow heads pointing in. You know what I'm talking about. You've seen this optical illusion before. The Müller-Lyer illusion. Now here's the catch. Even when you know the lines are equal, one still looks longer. Every single time. Your eyes lie to you, and worse, you believe them. Automatically. Instinctively. Without permission. That's not just a trick of the eye. That's a trick of the brain. Because this illusion reveals something deeper than just vision. It shows how our minds are wired to interpret the world based on context, not truth. Think about that for a second. Two identical things. One feels bigger, longer, more significant. Just because of how it's dressed up. How it's framed. That framing hijacks your perception. You cannot unsee it. Even if I told you the trick, even if I showed you with a ruler, it's not just visual. This is how we experience reality in general. We are constantly interpreting life through arrows, through context cues, expectations, framing. We think we're seeing the truth, but really, we're seeing filtered reality. A version of truth warped by everything we've been taught to expect. In the Müller, Lyer illusion, those little arrows tap into our brain's assumptions about depth and space. We evolved in a world of corners, angles, shadows. Our brains are trying to interpret three-dimensional space on a flat surface. And in doing so, they mess up. But here's what matters: the mistake feels real. That is what makes it dangerous. Because the moment you feel something is true, even when it's false, your guard drops. You stop questioning. You trust your instincts. You build on top of a bad perception. Now zoom out. Apply this to your relationships, your judgments, your beliefs. Two people might say the exact same thing, but one wears a suit, speaks smoothly, has the right body language. Suddenly, their words feel longer, more real, more important, even though they're saying the same damn thing. That's the illusion playing out in real life. Job interviews, social media, dating, marketing. We don't see what's there. We see what feels like it should be there. And what feels right is almost always shaped by the framing. That's why this illusion hits so hard. It's not just about lines. It's about truth. It's about how easily truth gets dressed up, bent, stretched, all while feeling completely honest to the eye. This illusion also explains why we get hooked by clickbait, why headlines distort our reactions, why the same news sounds more serious depending on who delivers it. Because perception is never raw. It's always cooked in the sauce of context. And that's where intuition leads us astray. Because intuition isn't about accuracy, it's about speed. Your brain isn't trying to measure. It's trying to guess fast enough to survive, and that's useful in a jungle. But in a world full of manipulated media, deepfakes, polished personas, fast guesses are dangerous. You think your eyes tell the truth. They don't. They tell you what your brain thinks is most useful, not what's most accurate. And once you realize that, everything changes. You start to question the things that feel obvious. You start measuring instead of assuming. You stop trusting the shape of things until you've looked under the surface. And let's be real. Most people never do that. Most people live in the illusion, guided by instinct, trusting the longer-looking line. That's why you see bad ideas win popularity contests, flashy leaders gaining followers, hollow opinions going viral. Because it's not about substance. It's about how things appear when dressed in the right arrows. We reward the illusion, over and over again. And the worst part, it feels natural. So if you want to escape that trap, you need to get uncomfortable. You need to accept that your brain is a biased interpreter, a storyteller, not a reporter. It edits reality in real time, and the only way to catch it is to slow down, to zoom out, to ask, am I reacting to what's real, or just what looks convincing? The Müller, Lyer illusion doesn't go away just because you know the trick. It keeps working. But knowing the trick lets you stop falling for it. That's the point. So maybe the lesson here isn't to stop having illusions. Maybe it's to start noticing them, and then refusing to act blindly on them. Because when you start measuring your perceptions instead of trusting them, you stop mistaking the longer-looking line for the truth. And that is where real clarity begins. Infinite chocolate bar trick. You take a full chocolate bar, make a few cuts, shift a few pieces, and suddenly you have the same bar with one piece missing. But nothing looks smaller. The infinite chocolate bar trick. You've probably seen it online in a YouTube short, Or maybe someone tried it on you in real life. It's weirdly satisfying. You watch the pieces move, and somehow there's still a complete bar left over, plus an extra square. It feels like magic. It messes with your head. And the worst part is, even when someone explains the trick, it still feels like something impossible just happened. That gut sense of something not adding up. That's your intuition getting hijacked. And that's exactly why this isn't just about chocolate. This is about how easily our brains confuse manipulation for logic, and how we mistake visual smoothness for actual truth. Because here's what's really going on. The illusion works because of a tiny gap that's spread across the bar. When you cut and rearrange it, the missing space gets distributed so evenly that your brain doesn't notice the volume loss. The bar still looks whole, but it's not. It's been shaved in a way that tricks your pattern recognition. The illusion survives because our minds are wired to prioritize visual consistency over numerical accuracy. That should scare you, because the moment something looks right, your brain relaxes. It stops checking. It assumes, guesses, fills in the blanks. And once you believe something is whole, even when it's missing a piece, you treat it like it's complete. This shows up far beyond candy bars. It's in your finances when you think you're saving money on a deal because something is on sale. But you're actually spending more overall. It's in your attention span when you scroll through content that feels educational but leaves you with no real knowledge. It's in your productivity when you check off easy tasks and feel accomplished, even though you avoided the hard thing that actually mattered. You feel like you didn't lose anything. But you did. You lost something real, and your brain didn't notice because the shape of the moment still looked intact. That's the trap. And the most dangerous part is that it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels clever. It feels efficient. You trick yourself into thinking you've made progress, when in reality you've just rearranged the pieces and convinced yourself nothing's missing. The infinite chocolate bar trick is a perfect metaphor for how people cheat themselves. With time, with logic, with truth. It's a sleight of mind, not just hand. Because it's not just about what's missing. It's about the illusion that nothing ever left. We are incredibly vulnerable to this kind of deception. Because we love things that line up neatly. We love balance, symmetry, patterns. When something visually holds together, our brain gives it a pass. And advertisers know this. Politicians know this. Anyone selling an idea knows this. They cut the facts, shift the pieces, make something disappear, and wrap it back up to look complete. And here's the kicker. Once the trick is done, your brain resists going back. Even when you know it's a trick, even when someone shows you the missing square, part of you still feels like the bar should be whole. It still feels like the illusion could be real. That's how intuition works. It doesn't operate on proof. It operates on impressions, on vibes, on whatever makes the most satisfying mental picture. And when the picture is smooth, your defenses drop. So what do you do with that? You start noticing where in your life the pieces have been shifted. Where you think something is intact, but something important is actually missing. Where you've convinced yourself a shortcut didn't cost anything, but it did. Where a situation feels too clean, too clever, too perfect to question. Because that's usually where the trick is hiding. The infinite chocolate bar isn't just about chocolate. It's about the mental illusion of getting something for nothing. It's about how easily we mistake a clever arrangement for an actual gain. And if we're not careful, we'll go through life applauding ourselves for getting extra chocolate, while quietly losing a square every time. The real question is, how many times has that already happened to you, without you noticing? Two-child problem. Imagine this. A man tells you he has 2 children. You ask if at least one of them is a boy, and he says yes. Now here's the question. What's the probability that both of his children are boys? Seems simple, right? You might instinctively say 50-50. After all, if one is a boy, the other is either a boy or a girl. 2 options. Feels obvious. But no, the real answer is 2/3. And the fact that this doesn't feel right, that it feels like math is lying to you, is exactly what makes this one of the most fascinating traps your intuition can fall into. Let's break it down. There are 4 possible combinations of 2 children: boy, 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 girl, girl, boy, and girl, girl. But if you're told that at least one is a boy, the girl-girl case is no longer possible. It's off the table. That leaves 3 valid options: boy, 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 girl, and girl, boy. Out of those 3, only one is boy, boy. So the odds that both are boys, 1 in 3. But here's where it messes with your head. Our intuition tends to mash together boy, girl, and girl, boy as one thing. It feels like one category, a mixed pair. But in reality, those are 2 separate arrangements. Birth order matters. And your brain hates that detail. It wants to simplify, compress, reduce. So it tosses out critical structure and replaces it with a gut feeling, a shortcut. And that shortcut leads you straight into a trap. The 2-child problem doesn't expose a flaw in your math skills. It exposes a flaw in how we handle uncertainty. It shows how we default to intuition over logic, even when the logic is staring us in the face. You're not bad at reasoning. You're just a human. And humans are built to survive fast, not calculate slow. Here's the thing: the way a problem is framed changes how your brain processes it. If I tell you, at least one is a boy, it feels like a throwaway detail, but it's actually a powerful filter. It shifts the whole probability space. Most people don't adjust for that. They hear a sentence, translate it into a vibe, and answer based on that vibe, but reality doesn't work on vibes. It works on structure. And when you ignore the structure, your answers drift further and further from the truth, while still feeling completely reasonable. And this happens all the time in real life. You assume you're making smart decisions, that you're weighing things fairly. But often, you're just mentally simplifying the problem to something more comfortable, something more intuitive. You round complex possibilities down to the cleanest version that feels right, and that's where bad calls happen. This is why people misjudge risk, why investors get blindsided, why juries fall for flimsy logic. It's not stupidity. It's a deep, automatic pull toward answers that feel easy, feel symmetrical, feel fair, even when they're dead wrong. And the worst part, that gut confidence doesn't go away. Even when you learn the real answer, it still feels off. It still nags at you. Part of you wants to reject the math like it's some kind of trick. But it's not a trick. It's just reality. Reality often is unintuitive. That doesn't make it wrong. It just makes it hard to feel. And feelings are how most people make decisions. That's why this simple sounding riddle has tripped up mathematicians, scientists, and everyday thinkers for decades. Because it reveals a hard truth. The more certain something feels, the more suspicious you should be of how quickly your brain got there. The 2-child problem is a reminder that some of our most confident answers are built on broken assumptions. And unless you slow down, look at the structure underneath, and examine the framing, you'll keep falling for these traps over and over again. It's not just a probability puzzle. It's a psychological mirror. So the next time a situation seems obvious, ask yourself, what assumption am I standing on right now? What detail am I rounding off to make this feel simpler? And is that detail actually the key to understanding what's real? Because once you see the structure instead of the surface, you start making fewer mistakes. You stop trusting the first answer that pops into your head. You learn to pause, to question, to see that sometimes one sentence can change the entire shape of the truth. And when someone says, "Least one is a boy," you'll know better than to trust your gut. Coin toss trap. Imagine flipping a coin 6 times and getting heads every single time. By the 7th flip, what's your gut say? Tails, right? It has to be. You're due. It's been heads forever. Surely, now it has to flip. But no, the odds are still 50-50. Every single time. And it doesn't feel that way. Not even a little. That's what makes the coin toss trap so dangerous. It's not that we don't understand probability. It's that we feel like the universe should be fair. That if something's been going one way, it should even out. Balance itself. Restore order, and that feeling, that's the trap. Your brain wasn't built to understand randomness. It was built to find patterns, meaning, cause and effect. So when you see 5 heads in a row, your mind starts whispering, something's off, something's loaded. Or if not, then tails is definitely next. Because it has to be. But that's not how probability works. The coin has no memory. It doesn't know it's landed heads 6 times in a row. It doesn't care. It just flips. And every time, the chance is the same. Heads or tails. Nothing else. No karma. No justice. No storyline. Still, we build stories in our heads. We imagine momentum, swings, a tide that's about to turn. And this doesn't just happen with coins. It happens with life, with sports, with love, with luck. You lose a few bets and suddenly feel like your next one must be the winner. Or you win a few and think you're on fire. You've got it. You're hot. You feel like the universe is either correcting itself or rewarding you. But the universe is not tracking your streak. It's just rolling dice. And here's where it gets deeper. That emotional pull you feel, that tension after a streak, comes from a false belief that outcomes are connected. That if you can just spot the pattern, you can predict what's next. That belief isn't random. It comes from the way we evolved. In nature, pattern recognition is survival. If you noticed that certain berries always made you sick, you lived. If you saw clouds before a storm, you prepared. Your ancestors weren't flipping coins. They were decoding the world, and seeing connections helped them. So your brain is wired to find links, even where there are none. Which means, ironically, you are trained to be fooled by randomness. The coin toss trap is really a mirror. It shows how we confuse luck with logic, how we mix emotion with math, and how we build narratives where there's only noise. Think about casinos, slot machines. People start betting more after a losing streak, thinking they're due for a win, or they double down on a winning streak, thinking they're hot. It's the same trap, just dressed up with flashing lights. And it doesn't stop there. Investors get caught in it. A stock goes up 5 days in a row, and people assume it'll keep rising, or it drops repeatedly and they wait for the rebound that must come. But markets don't owe you anything. Just like coins, just like dice, just like life, we're addicted to the idea of fairness, of balance, But randomness doesn't play by those rules. And here's the dangerous twist. We don't just fall for the trap. We build decisions around it. We change strategies, place bets, take risks based on a false sense of pattern. And sometimes it works, which just makes the trap stronger, because now you think you cracked the code, but you didn't. You just got lucky. So how do you break out? You stop trusting the story in your head. You remind yourself, every single time, that probability doesn't care about your feelings, or your streaks, or your need for things to even out. A coin flip is a coin flip. A dice roll is a dice roll. And the past doesn't decide the future unless there's a real cause connecting them. This is what separates clear thinkers from gamblers, from suckers, from people chasing illusions. The ones who see the world clearly are the ones who know when there's no signal, just noise. So the next time you find yourself feeling like something is due, pause, ask yourself, am I seeing a real pattern, or am I just uncomfortable with randomness? Because randomness doesn't owe you symmetry. It doesn't care about your streak. It's not a story. It's just chaos wearing a coin's face. Representativeness Heuristic. Picture this. You're at a party, and someone introduces you to a woman named Linda. They say she's 31, single, outspoken, deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and she majored in philosophy. Now, is Linda more likely to be a bank teller, or a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement? Without even thinking, most people choose the second one. It just feels right. It matches the image. She fits. The description screams activism, not some regular 9 to 5 bank job. But here's the trap. Logically, the second option cannot be more likely than the first. The second is a subset of the first. All feminist bank tellers are bank tellers, but not all bank tellers are feminists. That's just basic probability. Yet almost everyone falls for it. Why? Because your brain doesn't evaluate the math. It skips all of that. It goes straight to the story. It looks at Linda and says, what category does she remind me of? And then it picks the category that fits the vibe, not the numbers. That's the representativeness heuristic. It's a mental shortcut that uses similarity instead of logic. If something looks like a duck, walks like a duck, sounds like a duck, you call it a duck, even if it's a robot, even if it doesn't make any sense. And here's where it gets dangerous. Because the more vividly something matches a pattern, the more confident you feel. It doesn't matter if the pattern is irrelevant, outdated, or just straight up wrong. If it feels right, your brain locks onto it like a magnet. You see a person with a southern accent and assume they're conservative. You meet someone with a nose ring and guess they're liberal. A guy in a lab coat must be smart. A guy in a hoodie must be a hacker. It's all representativeness, and it's wrong way more often than we think. What's wild is that we don't just make these snap judgments. We build whole beliefs on top of them. We decide who to trust, who to fear, who to hire, who to date. Not based on evidence, based on resemblance. It's a kind of lazy pattern, matching that feels like logic but isn't. It feels like understanding, but it's just categorization. And because it feels so natural, we almost never question it. Think about how often this messes with our reasoning. A kid gets straight A's and people assume he's destined for success. But grades just reflect how well someone navigates a system, not how they'll perform in real life. A startup founder wears a hoodie and jeans, and suddenly we treat him like the next tech genius, even if he's done nothing yet. Because he looks the part. He fits the mold, He represents what we expect. This isn't just a social thing. It affects how we think about randomness, too. Ask people which is more likely. The sequence heads, heads, tails, or heads, 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 heads. Most pick the first one, even though both are equally probable. Why? Because the first one looks more random. It feels more like what randomness is supposed to look like. But probability doesn't care about appearances. It only cares about structure. Our brains, on the other hand, care way too much about appearances. Even in medicine, this messes things up. A patient presents with symptoms that match a rare disease, and doctors sometimes overlook far more common causes because the rare one fits the image. They chase zebras when it's probably just a horse. But the pattern match is too strong to ignore. Even trained professionals fall into this trap. And here's the worst part. The more information we get, the worse this bias becomes. You'd think that more details would lead to better decisions. But often, extra details just give your brain more material to build a stereotype with. The more vivid the description, the more you lean into representativeness. The stronger the story feels, the harder it is to step back and think statistically. So how do you fight it? First, you learn to spot it. When something feels obvious, ask yourself, is it obvious because it's statistically likely, or just because it fits a pattern I already believe in? Second, challenge the vibe. Remind yourself that resemblance is not proof. Third, step back and look at base rates, the actual numbers, the actual odds, not just the story your brain wants to tell, because intuition is not always your friend, especially when it's running on autopilot. The representativeness heuristic is like a con artist in your mind. It shows up dressed like logic, sounding confident, feeling right, and stealing your ability to think clearly. You don't need to eliminate it. You just need to learn when not to trust it. Because the truth isn't always dressed like you expect. And sometimes, the most dangerous assumptions are the ones that feel the most familiar. Taxicab problem. Imagine a hit and run happens at night. A taxi driver speeds off after knocking someone down. You didn't see the license plate. You only saw the color of the cab. Blue. You're not the only one. A witness comes forward too. They say it was definitely a blue cab. Absolutely sure. No hesitation. Crystal clear. Now here's what you're told, Zai, in this city. 85% of the taxis are green. Only 15% are blue. Also, studies show that this type of witness is accurate about 80% of the time. So here's the question. What's the actual chance the cab was blue? Stop. Don't guess. Think about it. Your gut says the witness is solid. 80% accuracy. That's high. The fact that they're confident adds even more weight. And if you also thought it looked blue, well, that must count for something, right? But here's the trap. Most people ignore one huge, inconvenient fact: the base rate. Only 15% of the cabs in this city are blue. And if you forget that, if you act like the color is just a toss-up, you fall straight into one of the most persistent intuition traps there is. It's called the base rate fallacy, and the taxicab problem is the perfect setup for it. So let's break this down the way your brain refuses to. You've got two pieces of info. First, the actual distribution of cabs: 85% green, 15% blue. That's reality. That's the base rate. Second, the witness, they say blue, and they're right 80% of the time. Here's what that really means. Imagine 1,000 hit and run cases. Based on base rates alone, 850 involve green cabs. Only 150 involve blue ones. Out of the 150 blue cabs, an accurate witness would correctly identify 80%. That's 120 correct blue identifications. But out of the 850 green cabs, a witness who's wrong 20% of the time would falsely identify 170 of those as blue. So now you've got 120 real blue identifications and 170 false blue identifications. That's 290 cases where the witness says blue, but only 120 are actually blue. Do the math. That's roughly a 41% chance the cab was blue, not 80, not even 50. 41, that's the shocker. Even with a witness who seems reliable, the overwhelming presence of green cabs massively reduces the chance that the blue sighting is correct. But your brain doesn't see it that way. Your brain latches onto vivid, emotional evidence, like confident eyewitness testimony, and ignores the boring base rate. It acts like all outcomes start equal, like every cab has the same chance of being involved. But they don't, and pretending they do leads to wildly wrong conclusions. Now, here's the real kicker. You'd make this mistake even if you understood probability, even if someone showed you the base rates, because once the story is in your head, once the image is locked in, it's almost impossible not to overweight it. It's not just a logic error. It's a human error. We do this all the time. A patient tests positive for a rare disease. We freak out, thinking the test is the final word, without accounting for how rare the disease actually is. A job applicant comes from an elite university, and we assume they're a top performer, ignoring how many people from the same place are just average. A startup gets one big media feature, and we assume it's destined to succeed, never asking how many other hyped companies flamed out. Why? Because our minds don't naturally process base rates. We want the specifics, the juicy details, the high confidence claim. But the truth, the real, mathematical truth, is often in the part we ignore. You know what this really means. Our confidence in our own judgment is often built on a completely broken foundation. We believe what sounds compelling, not what's actually likely. We trust stories, not statistics. And we let vivid claims bulldoze boring context. The taxi cab problem reveals how easily we confuse precision with accuracy, how often we let compelling voices drown out quiet facts, and how hard it is to accept that sometimes, even when the witness seems sure the numbers say otherwise, that's not just a flaw in thinking. That's a glitch in the human mind. And if you don't learn to recognize it, if you don't build a reflex for slowing down and asking what the base rate is, you'll be fooled by every confident expert, every eyewitness, every viral story that seems too solid to doubt. The truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's buried in the part of the data your brain skips. And if you don't dig, you'll never see it. Wason selection task. All right, here's a simple logic test. You're shown 4 cards sitting on a table. Each one has a number on one side and a letter on the other. The cards show A, D4, and 7. You're told, if a card has a vowel on one side, then it must have an even number on the other. Now here's the challenge. Which cards do you need to flip over to test whether this rule is being broken? Most people say A and 4. Makes sense, right? A is a vowel and 4 is an even number. Seems obvious. Flip them and check. Case closed. Except that's completely wrong. This test, known as the Wason selection task, has stumped students, adults, professionals, and even people trained in logic for decades. And what makes it so brilliant is that it exposes something deep about how we think we reason versus how we actually reason. The correct answer is A and 7. You flip A because it's a vowel. The rule specifically mentions vowels. But 4. Irrelevant. The rule doesn't say that every even number must have a vowel. It only goes one way. If vowel, then even number. So 4 could have anything on the other side. You don't care. It doesn't test the rule. But 7, that's the trap card. If you flip 7 and there's a vowel on the other side, the rule is broken. That's how you truly test it. And yet almost no one picks 7. Why? Because we're not wired to look for counterexamples. We're not wired to disprove things. We're wired to confirm them, to seek out validation, to look for what fits, not what contradicts. This is confirmation bias in its purest, most naked form. And it doesn't just live in this puzzle. It lives in every single decision you make, from who you trust to what you believe to how you argue. When we want something to be true, we don't ask what would prove it false. We gather evidence that supports it. We flip the 4, not the 7. We read articles that agree with us, not ones that challenge us. We follow people who reinforce our beliefs, not the ones who shake them. And even when we think we're being logical, we're just decorating our bias with the appearance of reason. The Wason task doesn't just test logic. It reveals a flaw in the way human minds deal with rules, truth, and evidence. Now here's where it gets even crazier. Researchers found that when this exact same logic task is reframed in a real-world context, like checking someone's age to see if they're legally allowed to drink, people get it right way more often. Replace the cards with a rule like if a person is drinking alcohol, they must be over 21. Then you give 4 people one drinking beer, one drinking soda, one is 22 years old, one is 17. Suddenly, people start flipping the right ones, the one drinking beer and the one who is 17. Exact same logic, but now it clicks. Why? Because when the problem is tied to something concrete, something familiar, something social, our brains engage a different mode of reasoning, a mode we evolved to use in real life. We're better at spotting cheaters than we are at solving abstract puzzles. That means this isn't a logic problem. It's a context problem. We're not bad at reasoning. We're bad at reasoning in the abstract. Strip away the human element, and our minds flail. But give us a situation we can relate to, where social rules are at play, and suddenly we're little detectives. But that should scare you, because it means the accuracy of your reasoning isn't just about how smart you are. It's about how the problem is framed, how your brain feels about it. And feelings, they lie. So here's the deeper lesson of the Wason selection task. Your mind isn't a neutral judge. It's a lawyer trying to build a case for what it already wants to believe. It searches for confirming evidence, not disconfirming. It tries to prove itself right, not honest. And unless you actively train yourself to flip the 7, to seek what would falsify your belief, you'll keep living in a world that only mirrors back what you already think. And the more confident you feel, the more dangerous it gets. Because confidence isn't a sign of correctness. It's just the echo of your own selective reasoning. So next time you're sure about something, flip the 7. Ask what would make you wrong. Ask what you haven't looked at. Because truth isn't found in what confirms your belief. It's found in what survives your attempt to kill it. And if your belief can't survive one flipped card, maybe it never deserved to survive at all. Overconfidence bias. You ever notice how some people walk into a room and talk like they've already figured out the entire world? No hesitation, no room for doubt, just pure, polished certainty. And the wild part is, they're often the ones who are most wrong. But it doesn't sound like a mistake. It sounds like confidence. It sounds like they know. That's what makes overconfidence bias so dangerous. It doesn't whisper. It roars. Let's say I ask you to predict how long a task will take. You've done it before. Feels familiar. You guess, maybe an hour tops. But 2.5 hours later, you're still at your desk, wondering where the time went. You didn't lie. You didn't try to deceive yourself. You just believed in your estimate more than the evidence deserved. That's what this bias does. It replaces realism with conviction. Think about this. Researchers once asked people to rate how confident they were in their answers to a general knowledge quiz. People who said they were 100% sure turned out to be right about 80% of the time. So even when people are absolutely certain, they're still wrong. And they don't even realize it. And it doesn't stop with trivia. Overconfidence shows up in everything: business decisions, personal goals, stock investments, life planning. People overestimate how fast they can work, how much they know, how much control they have. They even overestimate how honest and unbiased they are. It's not just that we're too confident. It's that we don't know we're overdoing it. Confidence is sticky. It feels like clarity, like momentum, like we're tuned in. But often, it's just ego wrapped in a disguise of logic. And here's where it gets dark. Overconfidence isn't just an innocent thinking error. It leads to real-world consequences. CEOs overestimate their ability to manage risk and blow up companies. Investors pour money into failing ideas because they're sure the next quarter will be different. People ignore medical advice because they're confident they know better. That's not quirky. That's catastrophic. What makes this bias especially tricky is that confidence feels good. It feels powerful, and people respond to it. When someone speaks with certainty, we trust them more. We follow their lead. We take their opinions seriously, even if they're talking complete nonsense. That's the real trap. Confidence becomes mistaken for competence, and so the cycle feeds itself. The most confident voices get the most attention, even when they're the least accurate. Now, here's the twist. The less someone knows about a topic, the more likely they are to be overconfident. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, a phenomenon where people with low ability don't just fail to recognize their incompetence, they actually believe they're highly skilled. Why? Because they lack the very knowledge that would help them see what they're missing. It's like climbing a small hill and thinking it's the summit, because the real mountain is still hidden behind clouds. Meanwhile, experts, the ones who've studied, who've made mistakes, who've learned nuance, are usually less confident. Not because they know less, but because they know how complicated the topic really is. They've seen the edge cases, the contradictions, the unpredictable twists. That's what real knowledge does. It humbles you. But in the real world, humility often gets mistaken for uncertainty, and uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. That's why someone with 10% understanding can sound more convincing than someone with 90% understanding. Because the person with 90% knows they could still be wrong. The person with 10% doesn't even realize that possibility exists. So what do you do? How do you defend yourself against this bias? Start by tracking your track record. Literally, write down your predictions. Note how confident you are. Then come back later and see how you did. Over time, you'll start to notice patterns, places where your confidence routinely overshoots reality. That kind of feedback is brutal, but it's also the fastest way to recalibrate. Another powerful trick is asking yourself this. What would I think if I were wrong? What's the opposite scenario? Could I live with being off base? Could there be information I'm missing? These questions don't feel natural because they force humility into a system that thrives on pride. But that's exactly the point. Also, learn to separate confidence from volume. Just because someone sounds sure doesn't mean they are sure. Just because they talk fast, or use big words, or speak without pauses, that doesn't mean they've thought deeply. Sometimes it's the quiet thinker in the back who sees the clearest. Overconfidence is not about being loud. It's about being blind. It's the illusion of certainty in a world full of unknowns. And it's not just other people's problem. It's mine. It's yours. It lives in the moment you say, I know exactly how this will go. In the moment you shrug off a warning sign. In the moment you skip the second opinion because you're sure you're right, but knowing this bias exists. Catching that little voice that says, trust me, I've got this. That's where the real power starts. Because the smartest people in the room aren't the ones who are always right. They're the ones who are ready to find out when they're wrong. Framing effect. Imagine this. You're in a hospital. A doctor tells you there's a surgery you need and says, there's a 90% chance of survival. You feel a wave of relief. That sounds good, right? You're likely to make it. But now rewind. Same hospital, same doctor, same surgery. This time they say, there's a 10% chance you'll die. Suddenly, it doesn't feel so safe anymore. You feel a little colder. That same room seems darker, and yet it's the exact same statistic. That's the framing effect. The way information is presented changes how we feel about it and what we decide to do, even when the actual facts stay identical. We're not reacting to logic. We're reacting to how it's framed. Here's the thing. Human brains aren't designed to be calculators. We're story-driven, emotion-driven, context-driven. The words we hear build a frame around what we believe, and that frame becomes our reality. Take another example. Say there's a new snack on the shelf. One label says it's 90% fat-free. The other says, contains 10% fat. Which one feels healthier? Most people instinctively reach for the first one, even though they're exactly the same. Why? Because 90% fat-free is framed positively. It gives you a feeling of control, of health, of reassurance. Contains 10% fat, feels heavier, riskier, a little bit guilty. Now expand that logic. Think politics, think news headlines, think advertising. A policy isn't called a tax hike. It's called a revenue enhancement. A job cut isn't a layoff. It's a streamlining. A war isn't a war. It's a peacekeeping operation. These aren't just words. They are tools. Precision instruments used to steer your emotions while leaving the core facts untouched. That's why framing is so powerful. It doesn't change the content. It changes the container. And when the container feels different, we behave differently. Even in experiments, this effect shows up strong. One famous study gave people a choice between two treatments for a deadly disease. When the treatments were framed by how many people they would save, people went with the safer, more predictable option. But when the same treatments were framed by how many people would die, people suddenly took more risks. Just a change in language, and the whole decision flipped. This bias isn't just some quirky psychology trick. It shapes real choices. Medical decisions, court rulings, financial moves, even who we vote for. Because we don't choose based on numbers alone. We choose based on how those numbers feel. And that feeling is created by the frame. The weirdest part, most of the time, we don't even notice it. We think we're being rational. We think we've weighed the options. But what we're really doing is reacting to subtle emotional cues, nudged into a direction without even realizing it. And it works both ways. Not only can others frame things to influence us, we do it to ourselves. We reframe our failures as learning experiences. We call an argument just a conversation. We describe bad habits as guilty pleasures. All of it softens the emotional edge. It makes it easier to live with. That's self-framing. And while it can be useful, it can also blur the line between truth and comfort. So how do you break free from it? First, start by noticing the frame. Ask yourself, how is this being presented to me? Is it trying to make me feel safe, feel afraid, feel lucky? Look at the exact words used. Are they tilted toward gain or loss? Toward security or risk? That awareness alone can shift your perspective. Second, try flipping the frame. If something is framed in terms of gains, reimagine it in terms of losses. If it's all about risk, flip it to safety. See how you feel when the language changes, and ask yourself which version you're reacting to. Third, when you communicate, whether it's pitching an idea or giving advice, be intentional with your frame. Because if you don't pick it, someone else will, and the frame you choose becomes the story they hear. And lastly, check your gut. If something feels too comforting, too reassuring, too urgent, pause. Ask yourself, is this the truth, or just a version of the truth wrapped in a prettier box? Framing is everywhere, in billboards, in job interviews, in product packaging, in social media captions, every headline you read, every pitch you hear, every message you consume. It's not just what they're telling you, it's how they're telling it. Because when people can't change your facts, they'll change your frame. And if you don't learn to spot it, you'll mistake the frame for reality. You'll think you're making your own choices, when really, you're just walking the path someone else laid out for you. And that's the true danger. Not that we're wrong, but that we're so sure we're right, because the story felt just convincing enough. Triangle count trap, all right, let's try something. Picture a triangle. Simple, right? Now imagine a larger triangle made up of smaller ones inside it. You know, like one of those puzzles that asks how many triangles you can see. Go ahead, give it a shot. You count 1, 2, maybe 5. Then you squint. Wait, what about the ones formed by combining smaller parts? You start second guessing. 9, 11. Someone else says 18. Another person says 24. Suddenly you're sweating over a triangle puzzle like it's a final exam. And here's the thing, most people get it wrong. Not because it's a trick question, but because their brain jumps into pattern mode. This is the triangle count trap, a perfect example of how our minds desperately want to see, not analyze. We're wired to complete shapes, recognize order, and move fast. That's great for survival, but it's awful for precision. This illusion hits because the moment we look at a shape like that, our brain starts working for us, but also against us. It fills in what's missing. It skips steps. It guesses before we ask it to, and that's where we fall for it, because counting triangles isn't about math. It's about cognitive bias. It's about how easily we confuse what we notice with what's real. See, the first number that comes to your head, that's a gut reaction. It feels fast, confident, almost automatic, but it's also shallow. That's what Daniel Kahneman calls System 1 thinking. It's your intuitive brain. It's quick and dirty, and most of the time, it does okay. But in situations like this, it misleads you. Because it feels right even when it's wrong. Now here's where it gets more interesting. Ask people to solve the same puzzle, but this time slowly. Tell them to label the corners, trace the lines, write out each combination. Suddenly, the number starts to climb. You go from 9 to 12. Then someone points out overlapping ones. Before you know it, you're up to 20, maybe more. And the only thing that changed was how you approached the problem. That's the trap. You were never looking at a fixed number of triangles. You were looking at the illusion of certainty. A puzzle like this tricks you into believing it's simple, because the image is simple. But the structure beneath it is layered, sneaky, and full of hidden complexity. And it's not just about triangles. This is how we process almost everything. Think about how you judge people. First impressions, fast, immediate. Your brain is pattern matching. That guy's wearing a suit, must be smart. That girl's speaking confidently, must be right. That headline sounds true, must be true. But if you stop and dig, you start seeing more. Just like with the triangle puzzle. The danger is, most of us never stop to dig. There's something called closure. In psychology, it means your brain wants to complete unfinished patterns. So if it sees a triangle, it wants to finish the edges, even if they're not there. If it sees a headline with a number, it wants to lock in on that number without thinking further. If it hears a story with a neat ending, it wants to believe it's the whole story. Closure feels good, but it's a trap. Because here's what the triangle count trap really teaches us. That certainty is seductive. It gives us a quick win. It saves energy. But it also blinds us. It makes us miss what's actually there. All the little pieces, the layered truths, the hidden angles we didn't stop to find. And once you realize that, you start seeing it everywhere. Not just in optical puzzles, but in conversations. In arguments. In media. In beliefs. People love simple answers. They love rounding down the messy parts of life into something they can hold onto. But reality isn't built that way. It's made of overlapping shapes, complex intersections, patterns that don't show themselves at first glance. And if you only ever count what's obvious, you miss what matters. So next time someone throws you a question that feels simple, pause. Don't let your brain rush ahead just because the surface looks clean. Ask what's underneath. What's being assumed? What you might be skipping. The people who learn to think this way, they start seeing things other people don't. They catch what others miss, because they've trained their brain not to stop at the first triangle they see. In a world full of fast takes and shallow truths, that's not just a cool skill. It's a survival tool. Zeno's paradox. Let's play a mind game for a second. You're standing at one end of a room. On the other end, there's a door. You want to walk over and open it. Sounds simple, right? But hold on. Before you get to the door, you first have to walk halfway. And before that, you have to walk halfway to halfway. And then halfway to that halfway. And so on. No matter how many steps you take, there's always another halfway point left. So technically, you never arrive. You just keep getting closer. Forever. This is Zeno's paradox. One of the oldest logical traps in human thought. And even though we know that in real life, you do reach the door, this paradox still messes with our minds because it exposes something very real. That strange disconnect between what we feel is true and what we know is true. It's not just a math puzzle, it's a mirror. One that shows us how our brains get stuck between motion and measurement. Zeno's whole point wasn't to say motion is impossible. Of course you can walk across a room. His point was more subtle, that our understanding of reality breaks down when we try to slice it into infinite pieces. And it turns out, that same kind of breakdown happens all the time in how we live our lives. Think about this. You set a goal. Could be financial. Could be creative. Something personal. You start making progress. You're halfway there. Then halfway again. But just like that room, every time you get close, your brain invents another halfway point. One more requirement. One more step. You never arrive because you keep moving the finish line. This is the trap. We fall into Zeno's logic without even realizing it. We convince ourselves we're not ready. We need to plan more, learn more, prepare better, wait for the perfect time. So we keep making progress without ever making the leap. We live in motion without arrival, and that's where the real damage happens. Because when you're stuck in that mindset, it feels like you're doing something. It feels productive. You're not frozen. You're moving. But if you zoom out, you'll see you're just circling the same idea over and over, chasing a destination that never quite lands. It's like people who say, "I'll start once I finish this course," or "I just need to research a little more," or "I'm almost ready, just not quite." They're walking halfway to the door, again and again, never reaching it, because deep down, their brain would rather keep walking endlessly than risk what happens when they finally knock. This isn't just psychological. There's a cognitive bias behind it. It's called goal gradient effect. When you're close to a goal, your brain gives you a hit of motivation, but it also increases anxiety, because now the possibility of failure is real. The closer you get, the scarier it feels. That fear triggers your brain to stall, to retreat into preparation, into more half steps. It's Zeno's paradox disguised as caution. But there's another layer. Our modern culture celebrates endless optimization. Be more efficient. Refine your routine. Make micro adjustments. That's fine in theory. But it also creates this illusion that progress is always better than action. That moving towards something is safer than actually committing to it. It's comforting. You always feel like you're getting somewhere, even if you never do. Zeno's paradox is a philosophical version of that same mental loop. It tricks you into believing there's always more planning to do. That maybe, if you take enough half steps, the moment will finally feel perfect, but it never will, because the logic of the trap is the delay. The problem isn't that you can't reach the door. It's that you've convinced yourself you shouldn't until you've calculated every single step. So how do you escape it? You break the loop. You stop dividing the distance. You stop analyzing and you act. That doesn't mean being reckless. It means recognizing when preparation has turned into avoidance. When the next step is no longer about moving forward, but about postponing the risk. Because here's the truth. Most doors in life don't open because you calculate them to death. They open because you reach out and turn the handle. Zeno's paradox doesn't hold up in the real world because the world isn't made of infinite slices. It's made of choices, of movement, of imperfect, messy action that doesn't always feel ready, but still gets you there. So next time you feel stuck in that cycle, one more tweak, one more revision, one more plan. Ask yourself, am I walking to the door, or just halfway again? You'll know the difference by how uncomfortable it feels. Action always feels like a risk. But that's how you know it's real. The paradox only wins when you forget you can break it. Driving versus flying risk. You ever hear someone say they're terrified of flying, but they drive to work every day without a second thought? Happens all the time. And you know what? Statistically, it makes zero sense. But emotionally, totally human. Let's break this down. When a plane crashes, it's a headline. It's a breaking news alert. It's a massive event with dozens, sometimes hundreds of lives lost in a single moment. It's dramatic, it's rare, and it's burned into your memory. Now compare that to car crashes. They happen every single day, quietly. One by one, scattered, local. And because of that, they don't trigger the same fear. But here's the reality. The odds of dying in a car accident are way higher than in a plane crash, like astronomically higher. You're way more likely to be killed driving 5 miles to the grocery store than flying 5,000 miles across the ocean. But we don't feel it that way, and that gap between what's true and what feels true, that's the trap. That's the glitch. It's not about logic. It's about psychology. And it all comes down to control. When you're driving, you're in charge. You've got your hands on the wheel. You feel like you can swerve, brake, react. You trust yourself. You feel like you have options. But when you're on a plane, you're just a passenger. You're 30,000 feet in the air in a metal tube, and someone else is flying it. So when turbulence hits or something feels off, your brain goes into panic mode, not because it's more dangerous, but because you feel helpless. And here's where it gets dark. After 9/11, a lot of people in the United States were terrified of flying. Makes sense emotionally, right? Terrorism is shocking, terrifying, and very visual. So people decided to drive instead. Road trips instead of flights. Sounds safer. But here's the twist. Researchers found that the number of fatal car crashes actually went up. Thousands of people died in those months after the attacks. Not from terrorism, but from choosing to drive instead of fly. In other words, their fear killed them. Not directly, but through a chain reaction of decisions based on feeling instead of fact. And that's the heart of this paradox. It's called the availability heuristic. Your brain doesn't calculate actual statistics when making decisions. It grabs whatever information is easiest to recall. So if a plane crash is fresh in your mind, because you saw it on the news or in a movie, it feels more likely, even if it's objectively rare. Meanwhile, the everyday danger of driving fades into the background because it's normal, familiar, invisible. This is the same reason people fear sharks more than ladders, or terrorism more than heart disease. It's not about numbers. It's about what your brain can visualize. What sticks? And once you understand that, you start to see how easily fear hijacks reason. Because here's what's really happening. The more dramatic and vivid the risk, the more space it takes up in your head. The more space it takes up, the more real it feels. The more real it feels, the more you avoid it, even if that avoidance leads to greater risk somewhere else. So we end up protecting ourselves from the wrong things, preparing for rare events, and ignoring the quiet killers. But it's not just about travel. This thinking bleeds into everything. People avoid public speaking more than bad investments. They worry more about plane crashes than dead. They fear being judged more than staying stuck, because judgment feels sharp, immediate, visible. While long-term risk is slow and silent, it's wild how much of our behavior is shaped not by what is dangerous, but by what looks dangerous. That's why we take risks we shouldn't and avoid the ones we need to take. And it's not that fear is bad. Fear is a survival tool. It's kept us alive for thousands of years. But in today's world, where most danger is abstract, slow moving, or statistical, fear starts giving us the wrong signals. It starts pointing us away from growth and toward false safety. So the next time your gut tells you something is risky, pause for a second. Ask yourself, am I reacting to the actual odds or just the most vivid possibility? Am I choosing control over safety? Am I protecting my comfort or my future? Because sometimes the real danger isn't up in the air. It's on the road you drive every day, the habits you don't question, the fears you don't challenge. You don't need to ignore fear, but you do need to check whether it's guiding you or trapping you, because smart risk isn't about avoiding danger. It's about understanding where it actually lies. False positive trap. Imagine going to the doctor for a routine test. Nothing serious, just something you were told to check. A few days later, the results come back positive. You've got it. That thing you were hoping you didn't. Your stomach drops. Your brain spins out. This changes everything, right? Well, maybe not. Because here's the trap most people don't see coming. Just because a test says you're positive doesn't mean you actually are. That might sound crazy. It might feel wrong. But this is one of the deepest logic slips the human brain makes. Confusing a test result with a truth. Let's make this real. Say there's a disease that affects 1 in 1,000 people. That's 0.1%. Pretty rare. Now imagine there's a test for this disease that's 99% accurate. That sounds amazing. You'd trust that, right? Okay. Now you get tested, and it comes back positive. What's the chance you actually have the disease? Most people say something like 99%, or at least very high, but that's completely wrong. In reality, the chance you actually have the disease is only about 9%. 9, not 99, not even 50. And the reason for that is simple, but incredibly counterintuitive false positives. Here's how it plays out. Out of 1,000 people, only 1 actually has the disease. The test correctly flags that 1 person. Cool. But the test also has a 1% false positive rate, which means out of the other 999 people who are not sick, it's still going to say positive for about 10 of them. So now you've got 1 real positive and 10 false ones. That means if you test positive, you're more likely to be one of the false alarms than the real case. And that's the false positive trap. It's not the test that's broken. It's our intuition. Our brains are just not wired to think in base rates, probabilities, or population statistics. We think in snapshots, in headlines. Positive equals problem, negative equals safe. Done. But in the real world, especially in medicine, law, finance, and even relationships, that kind of black and white thinking creates huge emotional overreactions. This is why people spiral after a test result, or why companies panic when 1 metric spikes, or why someone gets a single bad review and thinks their career is over. It's not the result that's dangerous. It's the meaning we attach to it without context. And the worst part, the more rare something is, the more likely this trap shows up. Think about airport security. Out of millions of people screened, the actual threats are vanishingly small. So even if a system is 99% accurate, it still floods with false alarms. And if you don't understand how that math works, you start making bad decisions based on noise instead of signal. This plays out in hiring too, or college admissions, or crime prediction software. If you build a test to find a rare trait, whether it's talent, honesty, or danger, you're going to get tons of false positives. If you don't question those results, you end up punishing the innocent or ignoring the real issue. But here's what makes this even trickier. Emotionally, a false positive feels the same as a real one. You don't know it's false yet, so your brain kicks into overdrive. It floods your system with stress, with fear, with all the what-ifs. And once you've attached that fear to the idea, it sticks. Even if someone later says, "Oh hey, it was nothing," that feeling lingers. It's like your brain burned it into your emotional memory before logic ever got a chance to speak. That's why this isn't just a numbers problem, it's a psychological trap. Because false positives don't just mess with facts, they mess with your decisions. They change your behavior. They make you avoid things, fear things, overprepare, or withdraw, all based on information that was never real in the first place. So how do you defend yourself from this? You start by slowing down, by separating the result from the reality. You ask, how likely was this before the test even happened? What's the base rate? How many people actually have this thing, do this thing, fit this thing? You stop treating tests, any kind, like gospel, because a test is just a filter, a noisy one. And the rarer the thing it's trying to detect, the more noise it throws. And most importantly, you train yourself to be emotionally patient, to hold space for uncertainty without letting it wreck you. That's hard, but it's essential. Because the truth is, false positives are everywhere, in science, in media, in life. You will get bad signals. You will get red flags that turn out to be nothing. That doesn't mean ignore them. It means investigate them with logic, with calm, without spiraling, because not every warning is a threat. Sometimes it's just the system doing what systems do, flashing the light, making noise, even when there's nothing there. Energy drink placebo. Imagine you're dragging through the afternoon slump. Your eyes are heavy, your mind foggy, and your energy feels like it's been drained dry. You reach for that energy drink that can promises a boost, a jolt, a surge to push you through. You crack it open, hear the fizz, take a sip, and suddenly you feel sharper, more awake, like the fog has lifted. But what if I told you that boost might not be what you think it is? This is the energy drink placebo effect in action. It's a fascinating trap where your brain convinces you you're energized, even when the drink itself may have little or no real impact. It's not just about caffeine. Sometimes it's the ritual, the expectation, the belief that you should feel a certain way. And that belief alone can trigger actual changes in how you feel. The placebo effect is a well-known phenomenon in medicine. People given sugar pills, believing they're powerful drugs, often report feeling better. Their symptoms improve, their pain dulls, and their mood lifts. Why? Because the brain is wired to respond to expectation. It releases chemicals, modulates perception, and essentially hacks itself based on what it thinks is happening. Now, with energy drinks, this plays out all the time. We associate those bright cans with energy, with buzz, with performance. The smell, the sound, the branding, they're all cues. So when you drink it, your brain flips the switch. Suddenly, your heart rate might speed up, your focus sharpens, your mood elevates. But here's the catch. Some studies have shown that people given fake energy drinks, ones with no caffeine or sugar, report the same boost if they believe it's real. This means part of the kick you get from your favorite energy drink isn't just from the ingredients. It's from the power of belief. And that's wild because it means your brain is a lot more powerful and flexible than you realize. It can simulate effects, create sensations, and alter your state based on expectation alone. This isn't to say energy drinks don't have real effects. Caffeine is a stimulant. Sugar gives you calories and a quick energy burst, but the placebo effect can amplify or even substitute for those effects. Sometimes the belief is stronger than the chemical. So why does this matter? Because it shows how easily our brains get caught in intuition traps. We assume what feels real is real. If we feel energized after a drink, we believe the drink caused it. We don't pause to consider that maybe our brain did most of the work. And when that happens, we can get stuck chasing illusions, purchasing more cans, relying on artificial boosts, ignoring natural ways to improve energy like sleep, hydration, or movement. The energy drink placebo also reveals how marketing and expectation shape our experience of the world. Companies know this. They design packaging, slogans, and ads to tap into that expectation. It's not just about the product, it's about the promise, the feeling of power and alertness you expect to get. And when your brain buys into that promise, it delivers. This trap goes beyond energy drinks too. It's the reason people swear by lucky charms, rituals, or superstitions. It's why you might perform better when you believe you have an edge, even if there's no logical reason. Your brain isn't just a passive processor. It's an active player in shaping your reality. So next time you reach for that energy drink, take a moment. Notice what's really giving you that lift. Is it the caffeine, the sugar, or your own brain's incredible ability to convince you're energized? Maybe it's all three. But the key insight is this: sometimes the strongest effects come not from what's in the can, but from what's in your head. Understanding that lets you reclaim power. You can harness your brain's placebo potential without needing to chase every chemical fix. You can build rituals, set expectations, and tap into your own internal fuel. And you can start seeing through the tricks your intuition plays on you every day. Because knowing the difference between real and perceived energy is the first step toward mastering your focus, your mood, and your day. Speed perception trap. You're driving down a long stretch of highway, nothing around but open road. You glance at the speedometer, 70, but it doesn't feel like 70. It feels slow, so you press the gas a little more. Just a nudge, 80 now. Still feels manageable, comfortable even. But you're going too fast, and you don't realize it. This is the speed perception trap, one of those subtle illusions your brain falls into without even noticing. And it doesn't just apply to driving. It shows up in sports decision-making, even in how we judge progress. Our brains are terrible at estimating speed when there's no clear reference point. And that mistake can be dangerous. Here's the thing. When you're moving fast but everything around you is also moving at the same pace, or not moving at all, your sense of motion breaks down. That's why driving 80 on an empty freeway feels slow, while driving 30 in a tight city street feels fast. It's not the speed that's tricking you. It's the context. Your brain judges speed by comparing movement relative to nearby objects. Trees whipping by, lane markers flashing past, buildings getting bigger or smaller. Without those cues, speed becomes invisible. That's why people speed more on open roads. Not because they're reckless, because their brain can't feel the speed. The trap doesn't feel like a trap. It's the same reason airplanes feel slow, even though you're moving at over 500 miles per hour. You're surrounded by stillness. The cabin doesn't shake. The view outside looks smooth. Your body has no tension cues. And your brain goes, "This doesn't feel fast, so I must not be going fast." Wrong. This illusion doesn't just affect movement. It affects how we perceive the speed of change. Take productivity. You might be getting a lot done, moving fast through your to-do list. But if it doesn't feel hard or chaotic, your brain might think you're not making enough progress. So you add more. You overload. You chase speed that's already there, because your internal reference is off. Same in sports. A player might feel like they're not running fast enough simply because the field is wide and empty, so they push harder, overshoot, and lose control. Coaches know this. That's why some drills include cones or obstacles, visual cues that create a sense of movement and feedback. Without that, performance can become miscalibrated. Even digital environments mess with our speed perception. Ever scroll through your phone for 20 minutes and feel like only 5 have passed? That's not just time distortion. It's speed confusion. Information is flying at you, your attention is jumping, but your body is still. No reference, no friction. So your brain can't process how fast you're moving through mental content. It feels slow, so you keep going. This trap is especially dangerous in leadership and strategy. In high-level work, progress often looks still. Meetings, planning, conversations. It doesn't feel fast, so people panic. They start pushing, rushing, micromanaging, trying to force momentum they think is missing. All because it feels like nothing's moving. But a calm surface doesn't mean still water. One of the worst side effects of this trap is that we often confuse speed with urgency. Just because something doesn't feel fast doesn't mean it's not important. And just because something feels fast doesn't mean it matters. Your brain will scream at you to respond to a fast, moving headline, a buzzing phone, a sudden problem. But go totally numb to slow, moving, massive risks like burnout, climate change, or broken systems, because those move quietly, without obvious cues. We're wired to react to what feels fast, not what is fast. And if you don't train your brain to catch that difference, you end up misjudging reality all the time. So how do you avoid falling into this trap? You build better reference points. In driving, that might mean staying aware of the actual speed, not just the sensation. In work, it means measuring progress with visible outcomes, not just how stressed or busy you feel. In life, it means checking in with your direction, not just your pace. You also build friction deliberately. You create systems that show speed, like trackers, feedback loops, or timelines. You slow things down when they feel too fast and speed things up when they feel stuck, not based on feeling, but on evidence. And most of all, you train yourself to question the urge to rush, because fast doesn't always mean right, and slow doesn't always mean wrong. Some of the most powerful momentum in life happens quietly, under the surface, without noise, without that high-speed sensation your brain craves. The real skill isn't to always go fast or slow. It's to know how fast you're really going, and to act accordingly. Because when your brain can't see speed, it fills in the blanks with feeling. And feeling can lie. Planning fallacy. You know how when you plan something, like a project or a trip, you confidently say it will take 2 days, maybe a week tops. Then somehow it drags on for weeks, sometimes months. You're not alone. This is the classic planning fallacy, our brain's sneaky way of tricking us into underestimating how long things really take, no matter how much experience we have. It's like optimism and reality are in a constant tug of war inside our heads, and optimism keeps winning. What's wild is that this isn't just about being hopeful or lazy. Even experts, CEOs, engineers, and seasoned planners fall right into this trap. We have this tendency to ignore past experiences or similar projects that ran late, instead focusing on the best-case scenario. We build a mental story where everything goes smoothly, nobody gets sick, nothing breaks, and every meeting is productive. But life rarely works that way. Imagine you're building a deck in your backyard. You say, "It will take 3 days because the instructions say so," and you're pretty handy. But you don't account for the time you'll spend going back and forth to the hardware store, or that the weather might turn, or that you'll get distracted by your phone or random visitors. Suddenly, that 3 days balloons into 2 weeks. The crazy part is, when the deck finally gets done, and it took way longer, you don't update your brain's estimate for the next deck. You chalk it up to that project, or bad luck, and dive into the next task with the same rosy timeline. This is called optimism bias, mixed with what psychologists call the inside view. You're imagining the plan from your current position, ignoring the outside view, which is looking at all similar projects and their actual outcomes. This fallacy isn't just inconvenient, it has real consequences. Think about big infrastructure projects like bridges, tunnels, or software development. Budgets blow up. Deadlines get missed. Public trust erodes. And it's often because planners underestimated risks and complexities from the start. They ignored what should have been obvious patterns from past projects. Emotionally, the planning fallacy feels hopeful and motivating. It gets us started, fuels enthusiasm, and makes the impossible feel doable. But it's a double-edged sword. That enthusiasm blinds us to reality. It blinds us to the small hurdles, the interruptions, and the mistakes that inevitably happen. Even worse, this fallacy feeds procrastination. Because if you think something will take less time, you might delay starting it, figuring you have plenty of room. Then, when the deadline looms, you scramble, stress, and cut corners. The very optimism that should help you gets twisted into a recipe for disaster. But here's where things get interesting. You can fight the planning fallacy by forcing yourself to take the outside view. Instead of imagining your perfect plan, look at the data, how long similar projects actually took, where they stumbled, what went wrong. Give yourself extra time and resources up front. Make contingency plans. Expect delays and interruptions as part of the process, not exceptions. Another trick is to break down big projects into smaller, measurable chunks with deadlines. This helps reality check your progress and keeps optimism in check. When you can see small wins or setbacks in real time, you recalibrate faster and avoid nasty surprises. And don't forget to reflect after every project. Ask yourself what went wrong, what you missed, and how your estimates compared to reality. Over time, this reflection rewires your brain to be more realistic. It doesn't kill optimism, it just grounds it. Because here's the truth, optimism isn't the enemy. It's necessary. It's what drives creativity, courage, and progress. But unchecked optimism that ignores reality leads to frustration, burnout, and wasted resources. The planning fallacy is a trap because it feels good and empowering to underestimate time and effort. But that feeling hides the cost of surprise, stress, and failure. Once you understand this, you start planning smarter. Not just with hope, but with honesty. You learn to respect complexity and uncertainty, and you become more effective at delivering results without the usual chaos. So next time you're making a plan, pause and ask yourself, am I seeing this clearly? Am I ignoring past lessons because I want to believe this will be different? How can I build reality checks into my plan so optimism doesn't blind me? Mastering this balance between hope and realism is one of the best ways to beat the planning fallacy and get your projects done on time, every time. Mirror reversal trap. Ever tried writing your name in front of a mirror and found it looks totally wrong? Or noticed how suddenly everything seems flipped when you watch someone else's actions reflected back at you? That weird, disorienting feeling is what the mirror reversal trap is all about. It messes with your brain's natural way of processing images and directions, and it's a perfect example of how intuition can lead us astray in everyday life without us even realizing it. The tricky part is that mirrors don't actually flip left and right. They flip front and back. It sounds like a subtle difference, but it's huge for how we interpret what we see. When you stand in front of a mirror, your reflection is reversed along the depth axis. Basically, front becomes back. But because we live in a world where left and right are the directions we move most, our brain automatically translates that reversal into a left-right flip. That's why your right hand looks like it's your reflection's left hand. This creates a mental shortcut that trips us up. We instinctively assume the mirror swaps left and right, and so we interpret movements and directions incorrectly when relying on reflections. That's why learning dance steps or martial arts moves by watching yourself in a mirror can be so frustrating. Your brain gets confused about which side is which. It's not just you being bad at coordination. It's your brain caught in this mirror reversal trap. This phenomenon isn't just limited to mirrors. It also pops up in situations like reading reversed text, interpreting maps, or even navigating new environments with unfamiliar landmarks. Your brain wants consistency, so it applies the mirror logic even when it doesn't quite fit. That can lead to mistakes and confusion, especially under pressure. What's fascinating is that our brains try to compensate for this trap. With enough practice, you can actually learn to override the instinctive left-right swap. People who do activities that involve mirrors regularly, like dancers, figure skaters, or surgeons, develop an ability to mentally flip their perception back and forth. They train their brains to see the mirror image correctly, reducing errors. But for most of us, it remains a hidden trap that silently shapes how we perceive and react. There's also an emotional side to this. Because mirrors show us a reversed version of ourselves, they can distort self-perception. We might fixate on things that look off because we're not used to seeing ourselves flipped. That can affect confidence and body image in subtle ways. The mirror reversal trap is literally changing how you see yourself, and not always for the better. Think about driving for a second. When you look into your car's side mirror, objects appear flipped and distances are harder to judge. Many accidents happen because drivers misinterpret what they see, trusting their intuition instead of double-checking blind spots. The mirror reversal trap here isn't just a quirky brain glitch, it's a safety hazard. The core lesson is that your brain is built to find shortcuts, and the mirror reversal trap is a prime example. It takes a complex reality and simplifies it in a way that usually works, but sometimes leads you off course. If you're aware of this, you can adjust. You can slow down, check twice, and stop blaming yourself when things don't line up perfectly. At a deeper level, The mirror reversal trap reminds us that what we see isn't always what's really there. Our brains filter and twist reality to make sense of the world, but sometimes the filters create illusions. The next time you find yourself frustrated, trying to mimic a mirror image, or confused by reflections, remember this isn't just clumsiness. It's your brain caught in a universal, invisible trap. Understanding this frees you from the frustration and helps you approach mirrored situations with patience and strategy. You learn to see beyond the illusion, to mentally flip the image and regain control over your perception. Because once you know the mirror reversal trap exists, you start questioning what you see, and that makes all the difference. Intuition in randomness. You know that feeling when you watch a coin flip and it lands heads 3 times in a row, and you start thinking tails has to come next, like the universe owes you a tails. Or when you follow a sports team, and after a winning streak, you just know their luck is about to run out. That gut feeling that randomness follows some secret rule, some hidden pattern, is one of the most powerful intuition traps there is. It messes with how we see the world because our brains desperately crave order, even when there is none. Our minds are wired to detect patterns, to find meaning, and to connect dots. This is how we survive and learn. But randomness, it laughs at our desire for neat stories and predictable sequences. Every random event, whether it's a coin flip, a dice roll, or the stock market moving up or down, is independent of what came before. The odds reset every time, and no matter what happened just a second ago, the chance remains the same. Yet, this is exactly the part our intuition can't grasp. Take the gambler's fallacy. If you're sitting at a roulette table and the ball lands on red 5 times in a row, your gut screams black is due. You start betting bigger on black because surely the wheel is balancing things out, right? But no, the wheel has no memory. Each spin is random. The odds don't care what happened before. But because our brains crave fairness and balance, we convince ourselves otherwise. This false sense of control can lead to serious losses because we believe in patterns where none exist. This same trap shows up in sports. When a basketball player scores a bunch of shots in a row, fans say they have the hot hand and will keep scoring. But studies reveal the hot hand is mostly an illusion. Each shot is independent, and even the best players miss often. We want to believe in momentum, in streaks that carry power, but randomness doesn't work that way. We see stories and flow that aren't really there. This is called the hot hand fallacy, and it's another example of how our brains misread randomness. Randomness also sneaks into how we interpret coincidences. Ever bumped into a friend from high school after years apart and thought it was fate? Or looked at the clock at exactly 11:11 and felt like the universe was sending you a message? That feeling that these events are meaningful is powerful, but it's just probability at work. In large populations, with millions of interactions every day, coincidences are inevitable. Our brains hate to accept that these moments might be random and meaningless, so we assign meaning to them. It feels good, but it's a trap. The danger lies in how randomness gets mistaken for skill, control, or intention. Investors sometimes attribute their profits to brilliance when luck played a huge role. Businesses boast about their strategy when random market shifts help them. This illusion of control feeds overconfidence and poor decision-making. When luck turns, those who ignored randomness get blindsided. How do you break free? It starts with humility. Accepting that randomness is real and our intuition is unreliable here. We have to stop looking for secret signals in random noise and start seeing events for what they are: unpredictable, independent, and often meaningless when taken alone. Statistical thinking is your shield. Learn to recognize what true randomness looks like, understand independent events, and remember that short-term streaks tell no reliable story. When you see patterns, ask yourself if they could just be coincidence. When you feel like now is the time for something to change, double-check your assumptions. Randomness is not your enemy, it's the world's natural state. Accepting that unpredictability governs so much frees you from the trap of false certainty. It makes you a smarter decision maker, less prone to chasing illusions or falling for false hope. Your intuition is a powerful tool, but in the face of randomness, it must be checked by logic and data. Only then can you avoid the trap and truly understand how chance shapes your life. Because sometimes the universe isn't sending signals. Sometimes it's just noise. And learning to live with that uncertainty is the smartest move you'll ever make. Ladder riddle trap. Ever come across a riddle that feels so simple, so straightforward, that you rush to answer without thinking twice, only to realize later you totally missed the point? That's the ladder riddle trap at work, sneaking up on your intuition and messing with how you process information. It's a classic example of how your brain's quick judgments can backfire when a problem is designed to exploit assumptions you didn't even know you were making. Picture this. You're told there's a man who climbs a ladder to fix a light bulb. The question is, does he climb the ladder from the bottom or the top? At first glance, it seems obvious. He climbs from the bottom. That's how ladders work, right? But riddles like this aren't about how ladders actually function in real life. They're about how you interpret the question based on what you assume. Here's where the trap kicks in. Your brain fills in gaps with what feels normal or logical based on experience. The riddle counts on your assumptions to steer you wrong. You don't even realize you're bringing extra info to the problem, and that extra info leads you down the wrong path. You get stuck thinking in the usual way, missing alternative possibilities. This happens because our minds are wired to be efficient. We use mental shortcuts, called heuristics, to quickly understand the world without wasting effort. But those shortcuts rely on context and prior knowledge. In the ladder riddle, your shortcut is to picture a ladder standing upright and someone climbing up from the bottom. You don't stop to question whether the ladder could be lying down or if the question might have a different meaning. This is why many people miss the trick. Their brains jump to conclusions before fully analyzing the question. They don't pause to consider that the ladder might be horizontal, or the man could be climbing down instead of up, or the entire setup is a play on words. Your mind's desire for speed and clarity blocks deeper reflection. It's not just riddles either. The ladder riddle trap reflects a broader cognitive blind spot. In everyday life, we often interpret questions, problems, or situations through our assumptions without questioning them. We accept the obvious explanation and ignore other possibilities. This can lead to misunderstandings, missed opportunities, or faulty decisions. Think about problem solving at work or in relationships. How many times have you thought you understood the issue quickly, only to find out later there was a crucial detail you overlooked because you assumed too much? The ladder riddle is a metaphor for those moments. It's a reminder that what seems obvious might be the biggest trap of all. The emotional pull is powerful here, because our brain rewards quick answers. It feels good to be sure, to feel confident you've nailed it. But that confidence can blind you when you learn the actual answer to the ladder riddle, that the man might be climbing from the top because the ladder is lying down, or that the question is intentionally vague. It shakes your trust in your own thinking. But this is also good news. Awareness of the ladder riddle trap gives you a chance to slow down and question assumptions before jumping to conclusions. It teaches patience in thought, curiosity about alternatives, and openness to ambiguity. You begin to see that some problems aren't about the first answer that comes to mind, but about exploring different perspectives. In practical terms, next time you face a question that seems too easy, pause. Ask yourself what you're assuming without realizing it. Could the situation be different than it looks? Are you interpreting words literally or figuratively? What if the obvious answer isn't right? Mastering this mindset doesn't just make you better at riddles. It sharpens your critical thinking, decision making, and creativity. You learn to spot traps in language, assumptions, and everyday problems that trip up others. And that's a huge edge in any field or situation. Because the ladder riddle trap isn't about ladders or climbing. It's about how your mind jumps ahead, filling gaps with assumptions and missing the bigger picture. Recognizing this can transform the way you think, question, and understand the world. Weight illusion trap. Have you ever picked up two objects, say, a small dense brick and a large but hollow box, and been shocked that the lighter one feels heavier? Even though your brain knows the actual weights, something about the way you perceive it throws you off. That's the weight illusion trap, and it doesn't just apply to your hands. It reveals a deep flaw in how your brain processes expectation versus reality. Here's what happens. When you see a big object, your brain automatically assumes it's going to be heavy. When you actually lift it, and it turns out to be light, your motor system is already bracing for a much heavier load. So the result is this weird sense that it's even lighter than it is. On the flip side, when you pick up a small object expecting it to be light, and it turns out to be heavy, it feels disproportionately heavy. The mismatch between what you expected and what you actually experience creates this sensory illusion. This is called the size-weight illusion, and it has been studied for over a century. What's wild is that it doesn't go away even after repeated experience. You can lift the same objects again and again, know their true weights, and still fall for it. Your muscles adjust, your grip force becomes accurate, but your perception, still fooled. Your mind refuses to update the expectation. It holds on to the belief that bigger things are heavier. Now that might sound like just a quirky little bug in the system, but this trap shows something much deeper about how humans operate. We don't just process the world as it is. We process it through a filter of assumptions, biases, and mental shortcuts. And even when reality gives us new evidence, we often stick to our old expectations. In real life, this shows up everywhere. Think about people's judgments of others. A person with a deep voice and tall stature is often assumed to be more authoritative, more competent. Even if they say something dumb, their presence carries weight. Meanwhile, someone who's smaller, softer spoken, even if they're brilliant, might be underestimated, because the mind reads visual cues and makes unconscious assumptions. Just like with the boxes, we judge based on the size, not the substance. The weight illusion trap also messes with how we handle information. A big, Thick book or a long report feels more valuable than a short one, even if the short one is sharper, better researched, more relevant. In meetings, someone who speaks with volume and certainty can overshadow someone who's quieter but more accurate. We assume that more time, more weight, more value, more truth. But it's just another illusion, an error in judgment dressed up as logic. And here's the really dangerous part. Because this illusion feels so intuitive, we rarely question it. We trust our senses. We trust our gut. But that gut instinct was built for a different world, a world where bigger animals were stronger and larger rocks were heavier. The modern world, it runs on ideas, perception, presentation. And in that world, relying on raw instinct leads you straight into the trap. But once you see the trap, once you realize your mind is tricking you, you start to notice it everywhere. In marketing, where heavier packaging is used to suggest luxury. In tech, where people judge the quality of a gadget by its weight in hand. In leadership, where we mistake loudness for strength. The illusion is baked into how we interpret weight: physical, intellectual, emotional. So how do you protect yourself? You start by paying attention to the mismatch. When something feels heavier or lighter than expected, ask why. Is it really the object? Or is it your assumption? When someone's words carry more weight, is it because of their content or their delivery? You stop trusting first impressions as final truths. You build the habit of pausing, reflecting, and digging deeper. Because the truth is, your intuition isn't wrong on purpose. It's just using the wrong tool for the job. Once upon a time, assuming big meant heavy kept you alive. But now, it just keeps you missiled. The weight illusion trap isn't about lifting things. It's about the hidden weight of expectations. How they distort what we feel, what we believe, and what we decide. Recognizing that weight, questioning it, resisting it, that's how you stay sharp. That's how you stay free.